Chapter 185. Hi, Eric. Elizabeth pulled the embarrassed Julia to Eric's side. Virginia looked at the sudden arrival of the two people and took the initiative to get up and leave. Elizabeth unceremoniously pressed Julia down on the sofa and sat down as well. Liz, why didn't you leave? Eric asked curiously. Elizabeth glared at Eric with dissatisfaction. Why should I leave? Don't you welcome me? Of course not, Eric denied. It's just that, compared to the identity of the second daughter of the Murdoch family, you definitely wouldn't be interested in such a small party, right? The second daughter of the Murdoch family? When Julia heard Eric's words, she curiously looked at the girl beside her again. Eric noticed Julia's puzzled expression and took the initiative to introduce her to the girl. Julia, didn't Liz introduce her to you? She's the second daughter of Mr. Rupert Murdoch, the owner of 20th Century Fox's News Corporation. Hey, Eric, are you trying to drive a wedge between me and Julia? Julia is right. You're really a bastard. Elizabeth angrily punched Eric's shoulder. Julia, who originally had some grudges against Elizabeth Murdoch for hiding her identity from her, wanted to cover her face in embarrassment when she heard the latter half of the sentence. God, how could she say that out loud? Eric froze for a moment, then laughed. Julia is finally willing to speak her mind. No, Eric, I didn't. The girl blushed and waved her hand, trying to defend herself, but she couldn't say anything. After blurting out that sentence, Elizabeth also felt that she had misspoken. She gave Julia an apologetic look and began to change the topic. Eric, is that woman your lover? Yes. Eric nodded without any intention of hiding it. Ah. You're really self-righteous, Eric admitted without hesitation, which made Elizabeth choke. What about Julia? Julia wanted to stop this blabbermouth girl, but since the other party had already asked the question, it was too late for her to do anything else. Instead, she looked at Eric nervously, not knowing how the other party would answer. What does this have to do with Julia? Eric asked curiously. I don't want to listen to your nonsense. Hearing Eric's words, Julia felt a trace of relief, but at the same time, a strong sense of loss arose in her heart. She stood up and fled like a rabbit chased by a hound. Looking at Julia's back as she left in a hurry, Elizabeth rolled her eyes at Eric. You really don't understand romance, Mr. Williams. Eric shrugged and didn't care that the girl had changed the way she addressed him. Liz, there are some things you don't understand, so it's better not to jump to conclusions. Oh, I'm getting more and more curious about you, Eric. How about you treat me to a meal when you're free? I hope to talk to you more. Not interested. Eric drank the remaining wine in his glass, stood up, and planned to socialize with the others. Hey, how can you be like this? Elizabeth unladylike tugged at Eric's sleeve. I'll treat you to a meal. Because Eric didn't know about the conversation between Elizabeth and Calta, and he didn't have any information about the girl in his memory, he directly labeled Elizabeth as a self-centered rich girl. Although the girl was of noble status, with Eric's current status, there was no need for him to flatter such a delicate girl. Eric tugged at the hem of his shirt a few times before he managed to snatch it from the girl's hands. Looking at the wrinkled hem of his shirt, Eric helplessly stretched it. Noticing the girl's indignant expression, Eric suddenly smiled evilly and slowly bent over. He leaned in front of the girl and said, Liz, there's something I need to remind you of. Elizabeth looked at the pair of invasive eyes in front of her and couldn't help but lean back. She involuntarily put her hands in front of her body and stuttered, What? As the girl stepped back, Eric continued to move forward. Sniffing the faint perfume on the girl, he stuck out his index finger and waved it in front of her. I want to remind you, don't ever be too interested in a man. Otherwise, you'll easily fall in love with him. Ah. Elizabeth opened her mouth and uttered a syllable. Seeing Eric leave after saying those words, the young lady recovered from her panic and stomped her feet. Bah, who would fall in love with you, bastard, egomaniac? A series of derogatory words floated out of the delicate young lady's mouth. After venting her anger, the young lady glanced around and found that no one was paying attention to her. Only then did she heave a sigh of relief. She stood up and tidied up her clothes. Raising her chin slightly, the young lady returned to her arrogant appearance and walked into the crowd with a glass of red wine. Lu Xun once said that there was no road in the world, but when many people walk on it, it becomes a road. In fact, this sentence could be extended in many ways. For example, some things shouldn't have happened, but some unscrupulous person inadvertently planted a seed of suggestion. After a long time, it became true. Mr. Williams, may I propose a toast to you? Eric walked through the crowd and chatted with the crowd. Under the lead of her mother, a little lowly held a glass of fruit juice in front of Eric. She looked up at Eric with her beautiful big eyes and looked expectantly at him. Of course, Sarah. Eric bent down with a smile and gently touched the little girl's glass. Then, he drank the rest of the red wine in one gulp. The little girl also drank a big mouthful of fruit juice. After watching Eric finish the wine in his glass, she said, "Mr. Williams, thank you for giving me the role of Anne Stewart." "It's nothing. Your performance was also very outstanding." Eric looked at the little girl in front of him. Sarah Michelle Gellar was only 12 years old, but the little girl's development was far from Drew's, who was growing up rapidly. Perhaps it was because of their family background, but Eric heard that the mother and daughter's living conditions were not very good. Hence, Sarah was only about 1.2 meters tall at this time. Compared to her peers, she was a little short. Her round face had cute baby fat. In his memory, the girl was only 1.6 meters tall. "Then, Mr. Williams, can I act in the movie that you're personally directing?" the little girl suddenly asked. Her tone was full of a little girl's childishness, and her big eyes were full of hope. Eric looked at Sarah's mother and then at the little girl. For a moment, he couldn't tell if the girl's mother had taught her to say this or if it was just a child's babble. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that it clashed with The Island Horror Story, the role of Jonah's little girlfriend, Jessica, in Sleepless in Seattle, would have been very suitable for Sarah. However, since the girl had already appeared in The Island Horror Story, he definitely couldn't give the role to her. Otherwise, it would make the audience who saw the same little girl in two different movies at the same time feel uncomfortable. "If there's a chance, I think I will." Eric found it hard to reject the little lowly who was full of hope. Hence, he could only answer. Chapter 186. It's hard to understand what kind of person he is. He's gentle, domineering, cautious, frivolous, indulgent, playboy, arrogant, cynical, talented, and full of bad taste. In short, you can see many qualities from him, and after getting along with him for a long time, you'll find that no matter what you do, it's difficult to find any confidence from him. When Wind and Moon was just released, I thought, I've succeeded. I've become a Hollywood superstar. I really did succeed, didn't I, Liz? Julia narrowed her eyes slightly and looked at the girl next to her with uncertainty. There was some unconcealable confusion and admiration in her eyes. Even Elizabeth, who was not very familiar with her, could easily tell. "Of course, Julia, of course you succeeded." Elizabeth continued the girl's words. Seeing that Julia was obviously drunk, she knew that she could not let her continue to drink. She secretly snatched the glass from the girl's hand, signaled the waiter passing by, and put a glass of juice in Julia's hand. Although her identity had just been exposed by Eric, Elizabeth sincerely apologized to Julia, and the gap between the two quickly disappeared. Because of Eric's words, the girl was very unhappy, so she unconsciously drank a few more glasses, resulting in her current drunken state. Perhaps it was precisely because she drank too much that Julia's mental defenses became very weak, and she began to talk to Elizabeth about the various past events between her and Eric. She took the glass handed to her by Elizabeth in a daze and took a big gulp of the liquid inside. As if she did not realize that the red wine had been switched, the girl continued in a half-drunk and half-awake tone. I thought I succeeded, and then I received a lot of offers, all of which were for millions of US dollars. Millions of US dollars. I didn't even dare to think about it before. In the end, that hateful bastard rejected all of them without even discussing it with me. I angrily went to argue with him. Then, he scolded me without any mercy, until I cried in front of him. He wouldn't stop. Oh, I always wanted to pretend to be a little proud in front of him, pretend to be more confident, but he always said such a simple sentence, or even a look, and he could make me completely unable to raise my head. Now I can't even have a boyfriend. When I want to date a boy, he always jumps out of my heart and points at that boy, criticizing him as if he's worthless. The girl gulped down another mouthful of juice in a drunken stupor. Suddenly, she laughed self-deprecatingly. But he just said, "What does this have to do with Julia?" Ha, what a jerk. What does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with me? Julia seemed to be muttering to herself, clearly showing a tendency to lose her composure. Okay, Julia, you're drunk. Do you want me to send you back? Elizabeth saw that the girl was showing signs of losing her composure, so she persuaded gently. For drunk people, it was usually necessary to be obedient in order to make them obedient. Yes, let's go home. I want to go home. I don't want to see that bastard again. Julia suddenly stood up, but she felt dizzy and fell back onto the sofa. Elizabeth hurriedly supported Julia's body until the girl came back to her senses. Then, she helped Julia slowly stand up again. Alan found Eric, who was chatting with Herbert Ross, and whispered a few words in Eric's ear. Eric looked at the banquet hall entrance, apologized to Herbert Ross, and walked in that direction. Soon, he saw Julia and Elizabeth. "What's wrong, Julia? Why did you drink so much?" Eric looked at the girl supported by Elizabeth with dissatisfaction, then looked around as if he was looking for someone. After a while, he asked Julia in disappointment, "Where's Allison? Where is she?" Allison was Julia's petite assistant with freckles on her face. In Eric's memory, the two of them had always been inseparable. "No. It's none of your business. I can drink as much as I want." When Julia saw Eric suddenly appear in front of her, she waved her arms exaggeratedly, and her voice became much louder. "You're controlling me again. What right do you have to control me? Shut up. Do you want the news of your drunkenness to spread tomorrow?" Eric glared at the girl and looked around. Many people had already noticed them, so he quickly motioned for Elizabeth to help the girl out of the banquet hall. When they reached the empty corridor, he was relieved. "Where's Allison? Should I ask her to send you back?" Eric asked again. The girl lowered her head and curled her lips in grievance. Perhaps she was frightened by Eric's roar just now, or perhaps she had recovered some of her rationality. "Allison is on leave. She stayed with me in the southern town for a few months. She's a little unaccustomed to the climate, so she fell ill." Eric sighed and said to the assistant behind him, "Alan, drive Julia back." Alan was about to answer, but Elizabeth interrupted, "Let me do it. After all, this gentleman is a man. It's not convenient. Julia drank a little too much. She definitely needs someone to take care of her." "You." Eric looked at Elizabeth in confusion, then at Julia. I want Liz to send me back. I don't want him. Stinky men, you stinky men." Julia seemed to be in a daze again. She hugged Elizabeth's arm tightly and leaned on her softly. Alan shrugged awkwardly. Eric looked at Julia and had no choice but to say, "Then I'll have to trouble you. Liz, do you know the address of Julia's apartment?" I know. It's at 11070 Wilsey Avenue in Beverly Hills." The girl lying on top of Elizabeth raised a small hand reflexively, like a primary school student answering a teacher's question enthusiastically. Her tone was a little cute. Eric shrugged and smiled at Elizabeth. "All right, now that you know, I'll send you down." As the elevator slowly descended, Eric looked at the two girls next to him from time to time, feeling strange in his heart. Although they hadn't known each other for long, Eric still felt a tomboy aura from Elizabeth. Could it be that she's gay? If that's the case, will Julia be? The image in his mind became more and more sinister, and Eric couldn't help but smile evilly. Fortunately, Elizabeth had been carefully supporting the girl and didn't notice Eric's strange expression. If she knew what Eric was thinking, Elizabeth probably couldn't help but kick Eric's calf. "My car is over there. Hey, can't you take the initiative to help me? You're not like a gentleman at all. After walking out of the elevator, Elizabeth pointed to the red sports car in the corner of the parking lot. She felt that Julia was on the verge of collapse and said to Eric with dissatisfaction, "Oh, sorry, I thought you could do it yourself." Eric smiled and stepped forward to support Julia's other arm. The two of them helped the girl to the sports car. After Julia leaned on Eric, Elizabeth took out the car key to open the door. Opening the back door of the sports car, Elizabeth turned around and was about to signal Eric to help Julia in, but she saw that Julia was holding Eric's arm tightly and muttering incoherently, "Eric, I dreamed of you again. Do you still want to teach me a lesson? Eric, you're so bad. Can't you be gentler to me? Can't you kiss me?" Seeing Elizabeth's dull gaze, Eric spread his hands innocently and weakly explained to the stunned Elizabeth, she's drunk." Elizabeth quickly came back to her senses. She silently pulled the girl off Eric and stuffed her into the back seat. She slammed the door shut and sat in the driver's seat. She started the car and was about to leave. In the end, she couldn't help but lean out the window and say to Eric, who raised his hand to say goodbye, "Mr. Williams, Julia was right. You're really a jerk." Eric looked at the middle finger sticking out of the window as the sports car sped away. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. Julia opened her eyes in a daze and felt like a big rock had been stuffed into her head. She couldn't help but raise her hand and gently hit her temple a few times before looking around. "Fortunately, it's my bedroom. I don't know if I should feel lucky or disappointed. I seem to have drunk too much last night, and I dreamed of that guy again. I even said some nonsense. Sigh, fortunately, it was a dream. Otherwise, it would be so embarrassing." The bedroom door lock made a clicking sound. Julia hurriedly pulled up the blanket to cover her body and stared at the door with her eyes wide open. A girl wearing a loose men's shirt appeared at the door. Seeing that Julia had already sat up, the girl smiled and greeted her. "Hi, Julia. You're finally awake. Otherwise, I would have had to disturb your good sleep." Julia gradually recalled some of the things that happened last night. She remembered the identity of the girl and forced a smile. "Liz, good morning. Is it you? Did you send me back?" "Yeah, you drank a little too much last night and even vomited a few times. You dirted our clothes, so I had to temporarily find a shirt from your closet. You don't mind, right?" Elizabeth asked as she tugged at the shirt on her body. "Of course I don't mind. I have to thank you." Julia quickly recognized the shirt on the girl. It was the one she secretly hid a long time ago and didn't return to Eric. However, Elizabeth didn't seem to realize that it was a man's shirt. Of course, Julia wouldn't take the initiative to say it. Chapter 187. "Well then, get up quickly. I made some porridge. I hope you like it," Elizabeth said with a faint smile before she turned and left. Julia craned her neck and looked out through the unlocked door. When she didn't see Elizabeth, she wrapped herself in a blanket and ran to the bathroom. She wasn't as carefree as Elizabeth and wasn't used to exposing her body so openly in front of someone she had only known for a day, even if the other party was of the same gender. 20 minutes later, Julia changed into a loose, light green dress and appeared in the dining room. Elizabeth had already prepared breakfast. When she saw Julia walk in, she only nodded at the hostess and continued to sit at the dining table with a roll of newspaper in her hand. She read it while eating, as if she didn't treat herself as an outsider. Julia didn't mind. She sat down on the other side, picked up a piece of toast, spread some peanut butter on it, and ate a few bites. She then tasted the porridge in the bowl. "Did you sleep well last night?" the girl sitting opposite her suddenly asked. Of course," Julia hurriedly replied. For some reason, she felt a little guilty. As for why, she couldn't remember. Her drunken memories had already turned into a mess that couldn't be sorted out. "If possible, I advise you not to do it again," Elizabeth said meaningfully. What again?" Julia looked at the girl sitting opposite her and blinked. "Drunk, don't get drunk again." Julia seemed to have realized something. Did I do something bad last night?" Elizabeth nodded without hesitation. Yes. Oh my God. Julia slapped her forehead. This is bad. If word gets out, don't worry, it won't. Elizabeth shook her head gently without looking up. She flipped the newspaper in front of her. I don't think that jerk will spread the news, Elizabeth said casually. Julia's eyes widened. Jerk. You mean Eric. Bingo. Julia was perturbed, and she even stuttered. That, Liz, What did I do that's out of line? It's not too out of line. You're just clinging on to that bastard, crying and begging him to kiss you. Oh my God. Julia cried out in distress. She hugged her head and slammed it against the solid wood table a few times. Seeing the girl's reaction, Elizabeth couldn't help but laugh. Don't hit it. No one will feel bad if you break the wood. After a long while, Julia raised her head and reached for the glass kettle in the middle of the table. She poured herself a glass of cold water and gulped it down. After taking a few deep breaths, she mustered up her courage and said, Liz, can you tell me in detail what happened last night? Are you sure you want to hear it? Elizabeth asked. Julia suppressed the thought of retreating and nodded. Elizabeth's memory was very good, and she wasn't drunk last night. So, she started from when the girl started to complain about Eric. She even added a lot of small details. I even told you about my dream? Julia looked like she was about to break down. She looked at Elizabeth hopefully and pleadingly, as if she wanted to hear a negative answer. Elizabeth picked up the bowl and drank the porridge. When she heard Julia's question, she nodded vaguely. Julia banged her head on the table again. It's over. I don't have the face to live anymore. How can I face people? Elizabeth finished the last mouthful of porridge and wiped the corner of her mouth. At the same time, she revealed a curious look and asked, Julia, Eric Williams really likes, Elizabeth was too embarrassed to be too clear. In the end, she just raised her eyebrows and asked vaguely. No, the girl on the table replied in a muffled voice. Elizabeth seemed to be relieved. So, it's all your imagination. I thought he was really a pervert. I was originally very interested in him. Liz, can we stop talking about this topic? I want to die now. Elizabeth didn't mind and said, It's nothing. Who said that women can't have fantasies? But yours is indeed a little special. You actually want him to hit you. That's just a dream. Julia held her head and weakly defended herself. Dreams are a convenient and fast virtual realization of human thoughts. It's essentially the same as waking up fantasies, but fantasies are controllable, while dreams are arbitrary. But if you don't have this thought in your heart, you won't have such a dream. The girl let out a few sobs, as if she was going to cry if she continued. Elizabeth stopped harping on this matter and took the initiative to change the topic. Julia, are you in love with him? Julia jumped up. The girl was obviously more nervous about this topic. No, of course not. I hate him. Oh, Elizabeth responded non-committally. She wisely didn't ask any more questions. Otherwise, she might be driven out by the crazy woman. At the same time, she muttered in her heart that this reaction was indeed extreme hatred. Julia stared straight at Elizabeth. Her fingers were pressed down on the edge of the table, and she looked like she wanted to do something. After waiting for a while, she realized that the girl opposite her didn't say anything else. She quickly let out a breath and said hesitantly, Forget it, Julia, hurry up and eat breakfast. I think your life is too boring. That's why you're imagining things all day long. Let's go shopping after breakfast, okay? I can borrow a private jet. We can fly directly to Manhattan. Fifth Avenue is a shopping paradise. I'll take you to some parties in the evening and introduce you to a few young people. Maybe they're not as outstanding as Eric Williams, but their families are definitely richer than him. I've met a few people like that at many parties. They're either too old, or they're arrogant people who rely on their family's wealth to indulge in debauchery. I even doubt if they have the ability to inherit the wealth of the previous generation in the future. In the United States, you have to pay taxes before you can inherit the inheritance. I heard that many rich children can only donate a large amount of their inheritance because they can't afford to pay the huge inheritance tax. Haha, you're only talking about a very small number. Elizabeth laughed. As long as they put in a little effort, those billionaires have countless ways to smoothly pass on enough assets to the next generation. The topic of conversation unknowingly shifted away from last night's embarrassing incident, and the two of them slowly began chatting away. Liz, what do you think of this shirt? Don't you think the one you're wearing is a little too big? After breakfast, the two girls went into Julia's cloakroom and began to pick out clothes. The two of them were about the same size and height, so there was no issue of size. But I prefer looser clothes. This one is not bad. Elizabeth had no intention of changing out of the shirt. She stood at the side and opened another wardrobe, minding her own business as she picked out a pair of trousers. Julia pursed her lips, her mind quickly thinking about how to get the girl to take off the shirt without noticing anything strange. Well, this pair of trousers is not bad. I'll take it. Elizabeth took out a pair of khaki casual trousers from the wardrobe and gestured at her waist. Then she put it on. Not bad, it's very nice. Julia's eyes turned. However, I think the khaki trousers look better with a light blue top. Pink is fine too, but white is more awkward. As the girl spoke, she quickly took out two small shirts from the wardrobe in front of her and gestured in front of Elizabeth. Look. Elizabeth blinked her eyes and looked at the two small women's shirts in front of her. Then, she looked at the one she was wearing. A thought flashed through her mind. Suddenly, she lifted the hem of the large white shirt she was wearing and took it off. At the same time, she shouted, "Wow, wow, so disgusting. I understand now. This must be that bastard Eric Williams's clothes. It's so disgusting. Bah, 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 my God." Chapter 188. Liz, do we have to do this? Maybe. I can return the shirt to him. In the small yard of Julia's house, the girl looked at the tin bucket in front of her that was used to burn sundries and asked with a twinkle in her eyes. Elizabeth forcefully pulled out the shirt in Julia's hand little by little and stuffed it into the bucket. She lit a match and threw it in. The flame rose briefly, and the pure cotton fabric quickly turned into ashes. In the end, only a few plastic buttons were still flickering with small flames. Elizabeth clapped her hands and patted the shoulder of Julia, who was staring blankly at the small flame in the bucket. Okay, Julia, if you want to completely drive that guy out of your life, this is a process you have to go through. Go pack your luggage. I've already contacted a private jet. We'll go to New York first. If you haven't had enough fun, we can also fly to London and Paris. I think I should talk to my agent first. I remember that I still have work to do in the next 2 days. Hey, you're now the top actress in Hollywood, Julia. You're not one of those small-time actors who have little freedom in the hands of their agents. But... Elizabeth interrupted Julia's words. No buts. Where's your passport? If you don't want to pack your luggage, just bring your passport and credit card. Let's have a quick trip. More than an hour later, a Boeing private jet took off from Los Angeles International Airport. At the same time, the director of Island Horror, Jonathan Demme, took off. With Michael Eisner's advice, Eric communicated with Jonathan Demme. Early the next morning, Jonathan Demme flew to Venice, Italy, to prepare for the anti-war publicity of Island Horror. Although there were still more than 2 weeks before the start of the Venice Film Festival, Jonathan Demme didn't have many contacts in Italy. He still had to figure everything out on his own. Of course, the earlier the preparation, the better. A few days later, Eric accidentally contacted Kapoor and heard his complaints. Only then did he know that Julia had been abducted by the Murdoch family's tomboy. Other than some sexual fantasies in his mind, Eric didn't think that he had anything to do with it. He felt that it was good for Julia to go out and relax. The girl's drunken reaction that night still left a big impression on him. In mid-August, the first 2 episodes of Friends that Eric was in charge of were successfully completed. After his personal guidance, the 6 main actors of Friends were completely immersed in their roles. This saved a lot of effort for the series director, Kevin Brett. After the audition, within a week, Disney, Paramount, Warner and other film companies made their own offers. Michael Eisner was determined to win. Disney directly submitted their offer the day after the audition. Both Island Horror and Steel Magnolias were 35% of the North American box office and 10% of the overseas box office. After seeing this figure, Eric instantly had a sense of déjà vu. Jeffrey directly pointed out that Disney's offer was based on the percentage of the box office that Fox enjoyed for the movies that he personally directed. It was completely based on the criteria of the North American box office exceeding 100 million yuan. Otherwise, it would be difficult for Disney to get any profit. In fact, this offer was much higher than Fox's, because Fox had obtained the videotape and peripheral rights of Eric's movies at the same time. Fox could get a large share of the profits from that. However, this time, Firefly had made it clear that they would not give up the videotape and peripheral rights of Island Horror and other movies. They only had the distribution rights in North America and overseas. After Disney, Paramount, which was more eager to get the distribution rights, made the second most attractive offer, followed by Warner and a few other companies. Columbia didn't even make an offer. What surprised Eric was Fox. On the second day of the audition, Fox sent someone to take away the script outline of Sleepless in Seattle. A few days later, Fox's Calta Hunter personally came to Eric and told him that Fox wanted to replace Sleepless in Seattle with Island Horror. However, they did not mention Steel Magnolias. Obviously, the plan that Elizabeth came up with on the spur of the moment had caught the attention of the shrewd Barry Diller. After evaluating Sleepless in Seattle, Fox clearly thought more highly of Island Shocks, which was why they came up with such a plan. Eric did not know what had happened, but he rejected Fox's proposal directly. Modifying the contract would definitely require a series of negotiations, and it was difficult to determine what would happen during this period. Since Disney had offered the same price, Eric certainly would not ask for trouble. After confirming that there was no competition, Firefly and Disney quickly signed the distribution contract for the 2 movies. "Eric, I heard that you bought Pixar?" Michael Eisner asked at the cocktail party after the signing of the contract. Eric calmly swirled the red wine in his glass. "Yeah, I'm more interested in animation, so I bought it for fun." "You're really young." Michael Eisner thought of something and shook his head. "So, the original cooperation between Pixar and Disney in the field of animation rendering was also cut off by you, right?" "Disney is a big company. Why would they care about a small company like Pixar? As long as Disney says a word, who knows how many animation companies would be willing to cooperate with you?" Michael Eisner smiled helplessly. Although Disney started out as an animation company, after Michael Eisner took over, he didn't place as much emphasis on animation as the previous leaders. Because of this, some board members objected. However, as Disney became more prosperous, these voices of opposition weakened. However, the lack of attention to animation films was only relative. Michael Eisner only paid more attention to live-action films than the previous leaders. It did not mean that Michael Eisner did not attach importance to the status of Disney animation films in Hollywood. Therefore, as Eric slowly rose, his acquisition of Pixar half a year ago also attracted Michael Eisner's attention. More importantly, Michael Eisner heard that Pixar was producing a brand new form of 3D animation, which aroused his vigilance. Chapter 189. Eric's sudden rise was definitely a unique anomaly in the history of Hollywood for more than half a century. This did not mean that Eric's movies were excellent. In fact, several of Eric's movies, including Home Alone, Pretty Woman, and Dark War, did not have much artistic flair, and there was no refreshing innovation. However, after Eric's consecutive films had achieved amazing box office results, in addition to the media that were interested in discussing and analyzing why Eric's films had achieved such great commercial success to attract attention and increase sales or ratings, several major film companies had gathered professionals to conduct a detailed analysis of Eric's films. Many of the analysis results would definitely gradually be reflected in the Hollywood film market in the next 2 years. For example, there would definitely be more live-action films for children, more Cinderella-style romance films, and a small wave of fighting wits and courage police and gangster films would also usher in a small wave of climax. In terms of studying Eric's movies, Disney was certainly not an exception. However, after Michael Eisner read various analysis reports on Eric's movies, he quickly understood that the reason why Eric's movies could achieve miracles in the box office was not because they catered to the needs of the children's market and captured the longing of young women for Cinderella-like romance, as the analysis in the document said. The most important reason was Eric himself. The reason for this conclusion was that all the movies that Eric had participated in so far had no common themes. There was no pattern at all. Back to 17 was a youth school film, Home Alone was a children's comedy, Pretty Woman was a romance movie, and Dark War was a police and gangster movie. These movies that were unrelated in theme had achieved success. If one wanted to find the biggest common point, then Eric was undoubtedly the most obvious. These movie projects were single-handedly operated by him. Of course, Back to 17 was a Fox movie, but if it was mentioned now, no one would think that the success of Back to 17 was due to James Brooks and Penny Marshall. Eric Williams was the key figure that led the movie to achieve a box office of more than 100 million yuan. Therefore, after coming to this conclusion, Michael Eisner paid more attention to Eric and Firefly's every move. He was ready to win over Eric at any time. It would be better if he could take him under his wing. He was a very ambitious person. As Disney grew stronger, so did his ambition. However, Michael Eisner had not yet inflated into the Disney tyrant, who would be opinionated and eventually be kicked out. With the achievements he had made in the past few years, his prestige within the Disney Group was absolutely unparalleled. As everyone knew, Disney started out in animation. Although Michael Eisner focused on the development of live-action movies after he took office, he also knew that animated movies were Disney's greatest advantage. It was necessary to maintain the dominant position of Disney's animated movies in Hollywood. In the past few years, while developing live-action movies, Michael Eisner also did a series of work to expand Disney's animated movie business. He arranged for the distribution of many classic Disney animations on videotape, as well as the expansion of the licensing of image peripheral copyrights, and so on. He achieved very dazzling results. Therefore, when Eric became more and more dazzling, and he privately acquired a 3D animation movie studio, Michael Eisner gradually became wary of this studio. 3D movies were a completely foreign concept to many people. Not long ago, Michael Eisner also knew very little about 3D movies. However, because in the 100 years of film development, there were examples of sound movies replacing silent movies and color movies overshadowing black and white movies, Michael Eisner had to pay more attention to this. He had a faint premonition that 3D movies were likely to bring about a major trend that would turn the world upside down. For this reason, he once again found Pixar's Tin Soldiers, which won the Oscar for Best Animated Short Film this year. He watched and analyzed it together with the management of Disney's animation department. The baby image in Tin Soldiers was very crudely made, and Disney's senior animators scoffed at it. However, the computer graphics design experts that Disney had specially invited from Silicon Valley studied Tin Soldiers and explained a series of technical points and difficulties to several Disney executives. They also stated that with Pixar's technology, as long as they had enough financial support, they could produce a 3D animated feature film that was more than 90 minutes long. Moreover, the quality of the feature film would not lose to 2D hand-drawn animation by much. The words of the Silicon Valley computer expert appeared in his mind again. Michael Eisner looked at Eric's stubborn face and knew that it was impossible for Disney to interfere with Pixar, and establishing their own 3D animation department was not something that could be achieved overnight. Eric, what do you think? Isn't Pixar producing an animated feature film now? How about we give it to Disney to distribute in the future? Since he couldn't interfere with Pixar, Michael Eisner had the idea of getting the distribution rights of the first 3D animated feature film. At least this way, he could keep the situation within Disney's control. Eric smiled and said, "Mr. Eisner, why are you in such a hurry? Pixar's first animation will be completed in at least 2 years. If we sign the contract now, both of us will bear a greater risk." Michael Eisner led Eric to a sofa and sat down, then continued to persuade him. Eric, you haven't been in Hollywood for long, so there are a lot of things that you don't know. In fact, before most big productions start shooting, they must have contacted the distributors to ensure that the movie can recover its funds in the shortest time possible. The investment for an animated feature film is at least $30 million. I think a 3D animation will definitely cost more. With such a large investment, if you don't prepare everything in advance, you will have to bear a greater risk in the future. There were also some things that Michael Eisner didn't say. For example, if the animated feature film was made into a bad film and no one was willing to distribute it, the investment of tens of millions would go down the drain. And signing the distribution contract with the film company in advance could prevent this from happening. By then, even if the film was bad, part of the cost could be recovered. But he didn't think that Pixar would make a bad film under Eric's supervision. Eric swirled the wine glass and lowered his head, pretending to think for a while, then raised his head and said, "Mr. Eisner, I can only say that if the animation is released in the future, Disney will definitely be my first choice." This meant that there was still no promise. The first choice was only a possibility. In Hollywood, the first choice was rarely the final choice. While Michael Eisner was disappointed, he also felt a trace of anger. As the leader of Disney, there were very few people who would reject him so straightforwardly and continuously. Although he didn't lose his mind on the spot, Michael Eisner's tone became a lot colder. "Eric, you have to know that I'm still under a lot of pressure from Disney because of the sharing price for Island Horror and Steel Magnolias. So, it's important that I give the board of directors an explanation. The company to cooperate with next year's film hasn't been finalized, right?" Eric also keenly felt the coldness and unhappiness in Michael Eisner's tone. He originally didn't plan to find another partner. The negotiations with the new line were coming to an end, and he would definitely focus on the development of his own company next year. However, thinking of next year, if Firefly wanted to rise, it would definitely be under pressure from all sides. It would be good to get rid of one enemy now. After thinking for a while, Eric reluctantly stretched out a finger. "One movie, Mr. Eisner. You should know the direction of Firefly's development, so I can only give Disney the distribution rights of one movie, but it doesn't include the videotapes and peripherals. You personally directed it." Michael Eisner showed a hint of joy, but he still confirmed it seriously. "Of course." Eric nodded. Michael Eisner finally smiled and raised his wine glass. "Then, happy cooperation." "Happy cooperation." Eric also smiled and clinked glasses with the other party. He knew that this cooperation was finalized. In Hollywood, there were many times when some people's words were like farts. If you believed them, you could only wait to be cheated. But sometimes, things said were more useful than a contract. For example, now that he had made a promise, if he went back on his word, it would be equivalent to making an enemy of Disney. Since he got the benefits, Michael Eisner no longer held on to Eric. After giving some instructions, he left to entertain the other guests. Eric looked at Michael Eisner's departing figure and sighed softly. He took a big gulp of red wine that he didn't know the taste of. "Eric, so you're here. You made me look for you." After a moment of silence, Jeffrey hurried over, wiping the fine beads of sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief in his hand. Eric moved to the side and let Jeffrey sit down. He asked, "Didn't you say that you were going to talk to Robert Shea about the acquisition and that you wouldn't be coming?" "We're done talking. There's nothing to talk about." Jeffrey shook his head and saw that Eric still had a disappointed expression. "What's wrong with you? Disney offered such a high share. Isn't that a happy thing?" Chapter 190. How can I be happy? "I was just blackmailed by Michael Eisner for a movie," Eric said helplessly. Although Eric didn't say it explicitly, Jeffrey quickly understood what he meant. What conditions did Disney offer?" "They haven't talked about it yet." Eric shook his head. "I just verbally promised Michael Eisner." Jeffrey breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good. It's just a movie. Anyway, you make movies like a hen laying eggs. However, I just heard news 2 days ago that Disney is going to terminate their cooperation with Warner in the overseas distribution of movies and hand over all the business to Bow-Way International. What does this have to do with me? Eric didn't care about Jeffrey's teasing. He was too lazy to think after hearing the latter part, so he directly asked. Of course it has something to do with it. After severing their cooperation with Warner, Disney's overseas distribution will definitely be messed up for a while. It's estimated that Bow-Way International will need at least half a year to integrate this business. If you agree to Disney's movie being scheduled for the first half of next year, it's likely that Bow-Way will use it as cannon fodder to expand the overseas market. If it's in the second half of next year, it'll be much better. Eric wondered. It's unlikely that Disney will use my movie as cannon fodder. Don't they want to make money? Jeffrey stuffed the handkerchief into his pocket and called the waiter not far away to bring a glass of red wine. He then said, a giant like Disney isn't interested in the box office profits of 1 or 2 movies. They're more interested in the expansion of distribution channels. The influence that your previous movies have accumulated worldwide is the best tool to expand distribution channels. Disney will use your movie's name and at the same time give up part of their profits to contact overseas distributors. This will make a lot of things very smooth. Maybe after the movie is released, Disney will be able to establish new distribution channels in several countries. Compared to these channels that can generate profits in the long run, a few profits from a movie is nothing. Eric nodded in understanding. Disney was using their own film as a stepping stone, so in the process, they would definitely lose a lot of overseas box office due to imperfect channels and other reasons. If that was the case, even if Disney expanded their channels, he and Firefly wouldn't gain any benefits. Although the percentage of the overseas box office was not high, with the scale of the overseas box office of his previous movies, it was still worth tens of millions of dollars. He did not have the heart to sacrifice himself for Disney's kindness, unless Disney could compensate him in advance. After figuring that out, Eric made up his mind. At the same time, he asked, Jeffrey, I remember you saying that there's nothing to talk about with Robert Shea. What do you mean? It means that there's nothing to talk about. Robert Shea insists on 15% of the shares and $60 million in cash. He's not willing to take a step back. That's why I came to you in a hurry. As the chairman, you have to make the decision yourself. Eric thought for a while and asked, Are you sure this is his bottom line? Jeffrey nodded. I'm sure. Robert Shea has also made it clear that this is his bottom line. He won't take a step back. And at this point, Jeffrey showed a strange smile. Robert Shea also specifically told me that unless you agree to this price, he won't accept any of your invitations to meet. This. Eric was instantly confused. Jeffrey didn't let him be confused for too long. He laughed and explained, when you had dinner with him for the first time, your words probably left a deep impression on him. He's afraid that if he confronts you again, he won't be able to help but back off. Yes, I think that's the case. Although I didn't participate in that meeting, it seems that in the end, Robert Shea was provoked by your provocation and directly took a big step back, right? How is that provocation? I'm just telling the truth, Eric retorted with a smile. Anyway, that's how it is. Actually, I think this price is quite reasonable. After all, New Line is an old company with 20 years of history. I'm going to put more effort into preparing for Sleepless in Seattle. I'll leave the acquisition of New Line to you. I've also prepared the relevant documents. I'll get my secretary to send them to your office tomorrow. Okay, got it. Eric nodded and looked at Jeffrey with some concern. Jeffrey, if the acquisition is successful, you might. Jeffrey patted Eric on the shoulder and gave him a square look. I've already thought about this over the past few days. I'll give the position of CEO to Robert Shea. I'll just be the president in charge of production, or even the vice president. Thank you, Jeffrey. Eric looked gratefully at the fat old man who had been supporting him since Home Alone started. Is there a need for this between us? Jeffrey raised his red wine and clinked it with Eric's. He remembered something and asked, By the way, can Jonathan Dime handle it alone in Venice? Do you want me to go with him? Actually, if it's possible, it's better to let Kapoor go. He has more connections in Europe. Unfortunately, he's an agent and doesn't plan on changing careers. Before you came, Michael Eisner talked to me. He'll use some of Disney's resources to help with this matter and try to win an award at the Venice Film Festival. John Landis happens to be a Hollywood director on the 9-member jury this year. Jeffrey frowned and thought for a while. John Landis, the director of the blockbuster American Journey last year? Yes, actually, John Landis is better at horror films. So, the theme of Scary Island and the label of a Hollywood film will definitely leave a good impression on him. Disney will also send someone to contact him. When are you going to Venice? A few days after the opening ceremony. The award ceremony will be held in mid-September. I definitely can't stay there for that long. I don't plan to go to the award ceremony either. I suddenly realized that I'm really pressed for time this year. September, October, and at most the first half of November, I have to produce both Sleepless in Seattle and Home Alone 2. During this period, I'll be busy with the new line. I'll definitely have to pay attention to the post-production of Al's Smelling Women. So, I don't even have a day of free time. Eric calculated quickly and complained. Who asked you to do so many things at once? Most directors can only direct 2 movies a year. You're planning 4 movies at once, and you're even supervising 2. Jeffrey smiled. You won't be so busy next year, right? I won't even if you beat me to death. I'm going to have a good rest next year. I haven't enjoyed life yet. Yeah, you've lived for 19 years. Jeffrey's teasing tone was a little envious. He looked around, patted Eric on the shoulder, and said, If you're tired, go back early. I saw a few acquaintances. I'll go and say hello. Okay, Eric responded. He had no intention of getting up. Jeffrey didn't mind. He picked up the red wine, stood up, and left. Eric slowly sipped the remaining red wine in the glass, planning to leave and go home to rest after drinking. But soon, a tall girl in a silver strapless evening gown appeared in front of him. Eric, I've been wanting to come and say hello to you, but there's always someone around you. Brooke Shousey sat down next to Eric. You're dressed up so beautifully tonight, Brooke. Eric smiled and raised the red wine in his hand at Brooke Shousey. Thank you, but some people just don't like me. The girl showed a bitter look, as if she was still upset about Eric rejecting her several times. Eric chuckled and didn't answer the question. The girl had always been very good at this kind of expression that teased men. Perhaps before Dark War, Brooke Shousey had always wanted to rely on him. But now, with the amazing role of the girl in Dark War, the girl no longer needed to give her body to get the role. He looked at the beauty of the girl from head to toe. In fact, he really wanted the girl to stand up and twirl in front of him so that he could admire her. I heard that you recently received a big production from Warner. What is it? Don't tell me it's the sequel to Batman? The sequel to Batman would definitely be a big flop. But in this era, being able to participate in a blockbuster with a budget of hundreds of millions of yuan was enough to gain a lot of fame. Brooke Shousey shook her head and smiled. No, the negotiations with Warner fell through. I chose to cooperate with Disney. That's why I'm here today. Oh, that's not really a pity. What's the film from Disney? Can you tell me? Eric asked curiously. Brooke Shousey nodded. I can't tell you the details, but the name is temporarily set as Rocket Expert. It's likely that the name will be changed in the future, so I can tell you. Rocket Expert. Eric almost spat out the red wine in his mouth. In his memory, this film should have been released in 1991. Then, it would have to wait until at least next year to start filming. Eric knew that because of his appearance, although many Hollywood films didn't disappear, the progress of filming and release had been messed up. However, this wasn't the point. The point was that Eric just happened to remember this film. This was the flop that made Jennifer Connelly take a 5-year hiatus from acting in his previous life. Eric looked Brooke Shousey up and down. The girl still maintained her softer image in Dark War. Obviously, She also realized that this image was more suitable for her development in Hollywood than her previous aggressive and beautiful appearance. However, Eric clicked his tongue in his heart. How bad must this girl's taste be to fall into such a big trap? Chapter 191. He vaguely remembered that after Jennifer Connelly came of age in his previous life, she had met with many setbacks, so she made up her mind and boldly acted in a thriller film. She once again attracted the attention of Hollywood. After paying such a price, she was lucky enough to change from an innocent child star to a sexy girl. Not long after that, she won the female lead role in Disney's The Rocket Expert. However, the movie immediately flopped. Hollywood had always been very superstitious. Several big-budget movies that Connelly had acted in had strangely failed, so no one was willing to invite her to act in mainstream commercial movies again. Jennifer Connelly did not receive any film offers in the following 5 years. When she appeared on camera again, it was already a few years later. Her screen image also gave people a feeling that things had remained the same, but people had changed. Eric. Seeing that Eric was distracted, Brooksvelt patted the man with some dissatisfaction. How can he be distracted in front of a beauty like me? This man is really hateful. Oh, sorry. Eric withdrew his messy thoughts and apologized. Then, he asked with uncertainty, The Rocket Expert you just mentioned, is it a sci-fi film that took place in Los Angeles in the 1930s? Brooksvelt opened her red lips in surprise. Looking at her reaction, Eric was completely sure. Facing Eric's determined eyes, Brooksvelt did not hide it anymore. She asked, Eric, how did you know? This should be confidential, right? Because if I guess correctly, this movie is based on the graphic novel of the same name by Dave Stevens. I just happened to read it. Eric shrugged. He had seen the movie, but he had never seen Stevens' novel. However, he certainly could not tell the truth in front of a girl. As for the content of the movie, Eric felt that the most interesting part was the scene where the Hollywood Hills logo was smashed and only the word Hollywood was left. Many Hollywood movies like to connect the plot with real historical events. The most famous one was, of course, Forrest Gump, which could be said to be extremely ingenious. Eric, what do you think of shooting this story into a movie? Brooke was smart enough to ask an important question upon hearing Eric's words. I don't know. The story is still very interesting. The key is how Disney adapts it. Eric shook his head without thinking. He had no intention of reminding the girl not to accept this movie. Perhaps the girl had already signed the contract with Disney, so it was useless for him to remind her. What's more, the movie was brought forward by a year, so the storyline would definitely not be the same as the one in his previous life. Sometimes, even a day's delay could change the screenwriter's mind, let alone a year's delay. Perhaps, The Rocket Expert, in this time and space would inexplicably become popular. If he reminded the girl not to accept this movie, the future version of The Rocket Expert would be a hit. Then, he would be cutting off her future. At that time, he would definitely have to pay for the role himself. Therefore, there was no need for him to say anything. It would be better to just be a spectator. Swirling the red wine in his glass, Eric was absent-minded again. When he thought of The Rocket Expert, he naturally thought of Jennifer Connelly. He did not know where Jennifer Connelly was now. He had already forgotten the taste of the girl's red lips. He did not know when he would be able to taste it again. It seems that I'd better not disturb you anymore, Eric. You're always distracted. Brooke stood up discontentedly, threw a complaining look at Eric, and turned to leave. Staring at the girl wrapped in the silver fish-pattern dress, Eric suddenly felt that Brooke's figure was very suitable to dress up as a mermaid and put on a mermaid tail. Eric shook his head and threw the messy thoughts out of his mind. He decided to wait for Jennifer Aniston to torment Jennifer Aniston. At night, in Jennifer Aniston's little house, the girl leaned on the man's arm, and for some reason, they talked about children. I'm only 20 years old. I don't want to be held back by children so early. I'm not afraid when I'm 19. What are you afraid of when you're 20? Eric said with a smile. Anyway, I just don't want to have children so early. I have to wait until I'm at least 30 years old. And at this point, Jennifer Aniston's tone was filled with strong anxiety. She raised her head and stared straight into Eric's eyes. And if I'm pregnant, will you marry me immediately? Eric's heart raced a few times. After a moment of hesitation, just as he was about to grit his teeth and answer, Jennifer Aniston pinched his waist. Look at how scared you are. Your heart is about to jump out. I knew it. Eric's big hand slid down the girl's smooth back, and he whispered, Jenny, forgive me for being a little greedy, but I swear I'll always be good to you. But that's not all I want. The girl's cheek gently rubbed against his body, and she murmured, I want you to only be good to me. I know that's impossible. But I want to leave you, and you won't let me. Jennifer Aniston's tone quickly became resentful. How can there be such a bastard like you in the world? Eric smiled and held the girl's face, kissed it, and then said in an old-fashioned manner, Little girl, you have to remember that all men in the world are bastards. So, it doesn't matter who you're with. Don't struggle anymore. That makes sense. Jennifer Aniston rolled her eyes. You're instilling your strange outlook on life in me again. You're just like an evil heretic. If you were in Europe a few hundred years ago, you'd definitely be burned alive. Eric couldn't help but retort, only heretics can live freely. They often believe in the gods in their imagination, but in fact, it's more like the incarnation of a fishing net in the depths of their hearts. I don't want to listen, you're starting to brainwash me again. Jennifer Aniston shook her head and reached out to cover Eric's mouth to stop him from continuing. However, the corners of her mouth were curled up. If Eric really continued, she would definitely be able to listen with relish. Eric chuckled and grabbed Jennifer Aniston's small hand, and even compared it with his big hand. Because of a year of work, there were faint calluses on his hand. Okay, I won't say any more. Although Jennifer Aniston didn't look up, her fingers playfully tickled his palm twice. Eric, are you going to Venice in September? Eric recalled his schedule and nodded. Yes, this year's film festival will start on September 4th. I'll probably stay there for a few days, and I won't go to the award ceremony in the middle of the month. After all, awards and such have nothing to do with me, and I don't need to stay there for too long. In fact, I didn't want to go at all, but since I'm in this industry, I can't always hide from too many things. I'm not a person like Woody Allen. September 4th. Jennifer Aniston suddenly raised her head. She didn't care about what Eric said after that. She just repeated the date just now. She seemed to have thought of something and suddenly became unhappy. She originally just wanted to complain a little about Eric and Vanigia in Venice again, but when she heard Eric say the date, she jumped up and said unhappily, Friends starts on September 3rd. Does that mean you won't be able to see the premiere of this TV series? It's the same whether I watch it or not. Anyway, I'm the one who filmed it. Why wouldn't I know the plot? Eric was puzzled. Jennifer Aniston sounded a little excited. Of course it's different. This is the first time we've worked together on a TV series. I originally wanted you to watch the premiere with me. Eric said a little apologetically, How about? I'll watch the second season with you? Jennifer Aniston punched Eric in disappointment. She turned her head and muttered, Who knows if your lousy TV series will have a second season? I watched the first season, and I think it's just Faced with the girl's temper, Eric couldn't help but smile and beg for mercy. Okay, I'll call Venice tomorrow and ask them to postpone the opening ceremony for 2 days. I have to watch the premiere with my girlfriend. Ask everyone to wait. Jennifer Aniston was stunned for a moment, then she burst out laughing. You bastard, do you think you're God? However, after laughing, Jennifer Aniston also thought it through. This matter really couldn't have the best of both worlds. What Eric wanted to do was more important. Okay, I'll let you go, but remember to bring me a gift when you come back. Eric reached out his hand and gestured the shape of a boat in front of him. No problem. How about a handmade gondola? Jennifer Aniston punched Eric's shoulder lightly and chuckled. Ha ha, sweet talker. Where are we going to row if you buy it? I want a mask. Eric remembered that in his previous life, he had seen a mask that his friend brought back from Venice. He didn't know what it was made of, but it had all kinds of patterns and feathers on it. It looked both gorgeous and strange. At least, that was what he thought. What kind of mask do you want? Eric asked as he recalled the details of the mask in Venice. Pick one yourself. See if you can guess what I like. Jennifer Aniston smiled mischievously. Why are you here? Early the next morning, Eric left Jennifer Aniston's apartment in high spirits and went to the company. When he walked into the office, he saw Drew sitting in his seat, fiddling with the computer in front of him. This girl obviously didn't know how to use the current computer system. Eric was sure that she was just blindly figuring things out. In order to prevent some files from being destroyed, Eric quickly went to the computer and turned it off. Chapter 192. Hearing Eric's words, the girl immediately showed a resentful look. You didn't come home at night, and your mobile phone was turned off. Who knows if you lost your way? I'm worried about you. Eric pretended not to see Drew's miraculous face-changing skill. He walked over, picked up the girl, and threw her aside. Then he sat in his office chair. Okay, tell me. Drew, who was thrown aside, didn't mind. She slowly turned to the opposite side of the desk and pulled a chair to sit down. Only then did Eric notice that the girl had actually changed into a more conservative lavender long-sleeved shirt. It seemed that she had just worn white casual pants. She also wore a pair of small leather shoes on her feet, instead of the usual small sandals that exposed her black toenails. This formal dress of a pretty girl from a humble family looked very unusual. Could it be that she was going to turn over a new leaf? While he was blindly imagining the girl's strange appearance like embroidery, Drew, who was sitting down, suddenly said, Eric, I have a big plan. The girl's rare seriousness made Eric somewhat uncomfortable. He couldn't help but make a joke. You found a wild man and want to scheme with him to seize my property? You're so hateful. I'm talking to you about serious matters. The girl suddenly flipped out. She picked up a file and threw it at him. Eric caught the file in a flurry and put it aside, saying, Okay, tell me about your big plan. Drew glared at Eric. After making sure that he wouldn't do anything funny again, she pulled out the small backpack that was originally placed at the corner of Eric's desk. She took out 2 printed documents from the backpack, handed one to Eric, and put the other in front of herself. Didn't you write a copyright acquisition list a few days ago? Eric, I plan to form a team and buy all these things one by one. This is the plan I wrote. What do you think? A copyright acquisition order? Eric was stunned for a moment before he reacted. After Drew got the copyright of Golden Jade League that day, he asked him for something else to do. So, when he was bored, he wrote the original novels or TV adaptations of the famous Hollywood movies in the memory of his previous life, including Forrest Gump, The Shawshank Redemption, Thunderbolt Girls, The Bourne Identity, Mission Impossible, and many other classic or blockbuster movies. He even wrote the original works of the Lord of the Rings series that only had the technical ability to start shooting 10 years later. There were more than 20 of them. He originally thought that the little girl would still choose one of them to operate, but he did not expect that the little girl was so greedy that she wanted to swallow them all. Eric raised his eyebrows, lowered his head, and started reading the thin proposal written by the little girl. Drew, the word redemption is misspelled. It's missing an E. Come, let me teach you. Eric, if you continue to be like this, I'll be sad. The little girl showed an expression that she was about to cry. Eric quickly stopped joking, closed the document, and said, What are you thinking? I just want to do something, and I'm also very interested in this matter. After the girl finished speaking, she showed a pleading look. Eric, can you promise me? Eric rubbed the paper and calculated in his heart. Based on the average price of $2 million per copyright, it will cost at least $50 million to buy all of them. Drew thought that Eric was going to refuse, so he said anxiously, It's not like you can't take out the money. I've calculated that you can get hundreds of millions of shares this year, and I'm not asking for 50 million all of a sudden. Don't interrupt me. Eric gestured to the girl to calm down. Of course, I can take out $50 million US. However, have you thought about it? If you suddenly buy the adaptation rights in such a big way, it will definitely alarm the other film companies in Hollywood. When others see you, they will definitely think of me. You know the situation of every movie I produce now. Therefore, they will definitely come to fight for the things I like. Even if no one fights, if the seller knows that I want to buy it, he will definitely take the opportunity to raise the price. Therefore, the final price will definitely be inflated. At that time, we don't know how much money we will have to spend. When the girl heard Eric's analysis, she lowered her head in disappointment and started picking at her fingers. When Eric saw the girl's disappointed look, he quickly thought of a compromise. Okay, Drew, don't be sad. How about this? It's definitely impossible to find a team to do this on a large scale, but you can hire 2 or 3 people. Their positions will be on flower pictures, and then you can slowly buy it in private, one by one. This way, it will be very quiet and won't alert the enemy. Moreover, this matter will be enough for you to be busy until you are 16 years old. When you are an adult, you can do more things that you want to do. When Drew heard Eric's suggestion, some hope was ignited. But, is 3 people enough? Eric stretched out his fingers and explained to the girl, an assistant to help you with your daily affairs, a lawyer familiar with the law in this area, and a negotiator in charge of contacting the copyright holders. 3 people are just enough. There's no need for more. That's the only way, Drew said, still a little disgruntled. Eric continued, I'll ask Edward to recommend a lawyer. The assistant is also very easy. The key is the person in charge of the copyright negotiations. This person is very difficult to find. I'll find this person myself. Drew immediately raised her head and said. Eric looked at the girl and remembered that she had found Lawrence banned last time, so he did not object. Okay, this person is up to you. Also, don't make any promises in my name. Drew pouted unhappily. Am I such a stupid person? Smart people are even scarier when they do stupid things, Eric said with a smile. The girl snorted, unconvinced. She stood up and packed her bag. Then, I'll be leaving first? Eric was about to nod when he remembered something. By the way, there's one more thing. Since you want to buy all the copyrights on the list, I'll make some comments on the adaptation rights that you want to buy. When the time comes, you'll have to follow the instructions and negotiate with the people. What comments? Drew sat down again. That is, some novels need to be adapted for at least 20 years, some need to be adapted permanently, and some TV series need to be bought together with the broadcast rights, and some only need to be adapted for a single time. Eric explained a little and flipped open the proposal that the girl had just given him. The last page happened to be his list. I'll give it to you tonight after I'm done with the comments. You're willing to go home tonight? The girl immediately pouted, but it was just a habitual complaint. Soon, she stood up and said, There's nothing else this time, right? Then, I'll go back first. Be careful on the road, Eric said to the girl's back. I know, old man. Chapter 193. I hope we can cooperate happily in the future, Eric. After signing the thick contract, Robert Shea stood up with a smile. Eric also stood up and shook Robert Shea's hand. That's for sure, Robert. On the last day of August, after nearly a month of negotiations between the two sides, Eric's Firefly Films finally acquired the veteran Hollywood film company New Line for 15% of the shares and $60 million in cash. The scale of these two companies was not as big as Columbia Pictures, the Hollywood giant that Sony wanted to acquire. They were also not involved in too many conflicts of interest like Columbia Pictures. In addition, both parties had a strong desire to cooperate. Therefore, after the price was agreed, everything went smoothly. As a rising upstart in Hollywood and an established second-tier film company, the merger of Firefly and New Line attracted a lot of media attention. After the signing ceremony, the two sides also complied with the media's request and held a short press conference. Then, of course, there was a celebration party. Although Eric didn't want to participate in such social gatherings, he preferred to quietly stay in his study. However, since he lived in such a country, he couldn't avoid things like parties. If he hadn't rejected a large number of invitations, with his current status, it could be said that he would receive all kinds of invitations to cocktail parties almost every day. Eric, I heard that the island horror that you were responsible for writing was very popular during the pilot test, right? Yeah, but you must know that I have signed a distribution contract with Disney before. Disney offered a very high share of the profits for the two movies, Island Horror and Steel Magnolias. It was hard to refuse. Eric nodded and briefly explained the situation to Robert. He thought that Robert Shea remembered the distribution rights of Island Horror, so he patiently explained to him. Now that the contract had been signed, Robert Shea was now one of them. He would serve as the CEO of the new Firefly Films, and together with Jeffrey, who was now the president, they would fully integrate the businesses of the two companies in the next few months. No, I think you misunderstood me, Robert Shea shook his head. I don't want the distribution rights of Island Horror. In fact, since Island Horror is very popular, then I think you must be good at writing horror scripts. So, I wonder if you can personally write the next script of A Nightmare on Elm Street. What do you think? Hearing Robert's request, Eric remembered the information about A Nightmare on Elm Street that he had read before. As a very important horror series in the new line, Firefly collected more detailed data during the negotiation process. It was much more accurate than the chaotic memory in Eric's mind. Although the first A Nightmare on Elm Street only had $25 million at the box office, because the cost was very low, the new line also made a lot of money at that time. Although the production and distribution costs of the next three movies gradually increased, they still made money in the end. However, the situation of the recent A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 was not optimistic. This new movie was released on August 11th. 3 weeks had passed since then, and it only earned more than $16 million at the box office. The final box office was about $22 million. After getting the share from the cinema, except for the production and distribution costs of about $10 million, the new line did not make much money. After thinking carefully, Eric said, "Robert, the horror style of A Nightmare on Elm Street is already fixed. I definitely can't write any new scenes. In my opinion, according to the box office data of the latest A Nightmare on Elm Street, I think this series can be temporarily stopped. Since the audience is already tired of the plot of Freddy killing people in their dreams, it will not be worth it if we force a sequel. If we freeze it for a few years and wait for the new generation of young audiences to grow up and the older generation of audiences to become nostalgic, then starting this series is the most suitable choice." When Robert Shea heard Eric's words, his expression changed imperceptibly. A Nightmare on Elm Street was the new line's signature horror film series. Although from a rational point of view, he understood that what Eric just said was very reasonable, he still felt very uncomfortable. Just after signing the contract with Firefly, Eric planned to cut off the sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street. This reminded him of ancient times when the king of another country annexed the power of the new territory and erased the other party's original mark. After all, Eric had lived two lives, so when he noticed the change in Robert Shea's expression, Eric quickly understood the other party's thoughts. He did not want to bury a rift in the cooperation between the two sides because of this low-cost horror film, so he quickly remedied, "However, Robert, this is just my personal opinion. You know, I'm still just a newcomer in Hollywood. There are a lot of things that I haven't thought about so clearly. So if you think it's necessary, the sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street can continue to be produced. As far as I know, the third and fourth movies both earned more than $40 million at the box office. Maybe this was just an accidental mistake." Robert Shea's expression eased a little. He also realized that Eric was compromising with him. Since the other party had made a concession, of course, he would not insist. "Then, Eric, we'll do as you say, but I don't think it's good to end it immediately. Next year, we'll make a final chapter. Well, let's call it A Nightmare on Elm Street. We'll temporarily end this series. I believe that with the gimmick of the final chapter, it will definitely achieve good box office. This is indeed a good idea." Eric also admired Robert Shea's wit, so he took the opportunity to make a small promise. "Maybe I can help with the script for the last movie." "Really?" Robert Shea could not help but confirm again. He thought that Eric's words just now were a clear rejection. The value of Eric's script was recognized in Hollywood. Of course. Eric nodded decisively. At the same time, he added a sentence in his heart. Of course, he would not participate in the signing. He did not care about the fame and benefits of A Nightmare on Elm Street. But if he signed his name and the last movie did not have a good reputation, he would definitely be scolded. And among a large group of main creators, even if he was just a screenwriter, he would definitely be the most conspicuous one. He would definitely become the focal point of the fans' firepower. Although it was said that if one stood by the river, one's shoes would eventually get wet, Eric did not want to be involved with bad movies after just 1 or 2 years. The box office success of producing movies was the sharpest bargaining chip in his hand now. If the weight of this important bargaining chip was reduced because of 1 or 2 bad movies that had little to do with him, it would definitely not be worth it. At the same time, this was also the reason why Eric temporarily only copied the classic movies in his mind and did not make a movie that completely belonged to him according to his own wishes. Perhaps in a few years, everything would be settled and his position in Hollywood would be completely unshakable. Then, he would definitely make a few movies that did not exist in his previous life and that he was very interested in. Chapter 194. Eric, doesn't Firefly still have a movie this year that hasn't found a distributor yet? After chatting for a while about other things, Robert Shea unknowingly changed the topic to Firefly's movie. Eric looked around. Smell a Woman had finally finished filming this month and had entered the post-production stage. He had seen Al Pacino just now. Because he was chatting with Robert Shea at the time, Al just nodded at him from afar. However, at a glance, although many people greeted him when they met his gaze, he didn't see Al and the others for a while. He could only quickly turn his gaze back to Robert and say, "Yes, but Recognizing a Woman by Smelling Fragrance is an anti-Olympic art film. If it can win an award, the box office of this movie will definitely be good. If it can't, it's hard to say. Although I've seen Russian films and AL's performance is very amazing, there are still a lot of games in the Oscars. An excellent film doesn't necessarily win an award." Robert Shea knew that Eric didn't trust his public relations connections. "Eric, I admit that in terms of connections, I'm definitely not as good as the Big Six, but it doesn't mean that the other party can win an award because of this. The Big Six can at most rely on this advantage to get a few nominations at the Oscars and increase the box office and follow-up video sales. Just like last year, you should have seen Working Girl. Although that movie got a series of nominations, it didn't win anything in the end. This is the result of Fox's public relations. The real award is definitely based on strength. Although public relations is indispensable, it doesn't mean that public relations represent everything. Eric, think about it again. If Smell a Woman is handed over to a big company to distribute, they will definitely have other movies to deal with. Therefore, they won't focus all their energy on this movie, but I can put all my resources and connections into this movie." Eric fell into a brief hesitation. Robert Shea knew that Eric had changed his mind, so he quickly said, "Eric, haven't you noticed? This year is a typical Oscar year." Eric showed a puzzled expression. He vaguely remembered that there was such a saying, but he didn't know much about it. Robert Shea patiently explained, "Think about it. Last year, there was Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man, Jodie Foster's The Defendant, as well as a series of Oscar hits like Unexpected Traveler, Mississippi is Burning, and Dangerous Liaisons. In the previous Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Drama category, there were 3 yokes because of this. For the first time, there was a situation where 3 people won Best Actress at the same time. That was the standard Oscar year. But it's different this year. 2/3 of the year has already passed, and I haven't even seen a shadow of an Oscar hit film. You might say that those films will definitely be released at the end of the year, but I still pay some attention to this aspect. In my memory, there are no new works by famous directors or famous actors that will be released at the end of the year. That's why I'm sure that this year will be the year of the Oscars. As long as it's as you said, Mr. Al Pacino's performance in Knowing Women by Scent was amazing. Then, With him having been nominated for Best Actor several times before, it's easy to imagine the final result. Eric fell into deep thought. He didn't pay attention to Robert Shaye and directly ignored the possible achievements of Pretty Woman and Dark War at the Oscars. He knew that he was not even 20 years old, and the conservative style of the Film Academy would definitely not award him any awards. It would be good enough if he could get a few nominations. He was thinking about what Robert Shaye said about the year of the Oscars. With Robert Shaye's explanation, Eric also remembered more about the year of the Oscars in his previous life. In his memory, Knowing Women by Scent seemed to have only one Best Actor. Eric didn't know who it was nominated for Best Picture, but if this year was really the year of the Oscars, Knowing Women by Scent would definitely have the possibility of competing for Best Picture. Eric. Robert Shaye waited for a while, but seeing that Eric didn't respond, he couldn't help but remind him. When Eric heard his name, he suddenly stopped thinking. He accidentally shook his wrist and almost spilled the red wine. "Oh, sorry, Robert. I was a little distracted." Robert Shaye asked, "What do you think?" "Huh?" Eric didn't react for a while after Robert's long speech. "About the release of Knowing Women by Scent?" Robert Shaye seemed to remind him patiently. Eric was a little conflicted. If this year was the year of the Oscars, it would be safer to let the Big Seven handle Knowing Women by Scent. Before the brothers Wayne and Stan became Oscar gold medalists, the big film companies still had an absolute advantage in the public relations aspect of this award. But at the same time, he also knew that, as Robert Shaye said, none of the Big Seven would fully handle Knowing Women by Scent unless he gave up most of the benefits. But wasn't winning an award for benefits? Eric was about to agree, but Al Pacino finally came out of nowhere and walked towards him. Eric remembered his promise to Al. This movie was created for Al Pacino to win Best Actor. Then, if he listened to Robert Shaye's suggestion and released the new line after the merger with Firefly, he would definitely have to take a certain risk in the public relations aspect of the award. Although the possibility was very small, what if Al missed out on the Oscar for Best Actor because of the butterfly effect? At that time, it would be hard to guarantee that Al would not be estranged from Firefly because of this matter. Eric personally valued his partnership with Al Pacino. The 1990s was also the peak of AL's acting career. If he maintained a good relationship with him, Firefly might have more benefits in terms of box office and awards. Since that was the case, Lindley decided to leave the decision to Al. Although there was a high chance that Al would agree after being tricked by Robert, it was unlikely that Al would vent his anger on the Fireflies if something really happened that had a very small probability of happening. "Robert, regarding this matter, I personally agree," Eric said. Without waiting for Robert to reveal a happy expression, Eric continued. "However, Smelling Women was a decision I made in order to invite Al to participate in Wind and Moon. Although Al has now obtained more because of Wind and Moon, I can't ignore my initial promise. Therefore, if you want to keep the distribution rights of Smelling Women, you still have to convince Al." "Oh, look, he's here." Eric casually put the goblet on a passing waiter's tray and walked towards Al Pacino. "Al, long time no see." Al Pacino gave Eric a warm hug. "Long time no see, Eric. You look more mature and handsome than before. You're even more charming to the girls. Don't forget to give us old men a way out." "Haha, can't you find a beauty with your methods?" Eric joked with Al for a while before introducing him. "Al, this is Robert Shaye. Robert, this is Al. Actually, you don't need to introduce us. We know each other," Al said as he shook hands with Robert Shaye. "Hello, Robert. I believe that cooperating with Eric was the right choice." Robert Shaye smiled. "I hope so too. Then, we were just talking about Wind and Moon. You guys talk. I'll go to the washroom first." Eric pointed to the corridor not far away. Although Al Pacino wanted to chat more with Eric, he could only nod when he saw where he was pointing. Eric casually greeted the guests and walked slowly to the entrance of the banquet hall. He passed through the crowd and had just stepped into the corridor when a petite red body bumped into him. She cried out and fell backward. Eric quickly reached out to catch the girl and held her in his arms. "It's you. You're, Gabe." Eric recognized the face at first glance, but he couldn't think of the other party's name immediately. Although he had miraculously copied the memories of his previous life because of his transmigration, this body did not have the ability to remember everything he saw. "Gabriel Anwar," the girl replied softly. The young woman replied softly. She had been happy to discover that it was Eric who was hugging her, but when she realized that he didn't recognize her, she felt a sense of loss. She placed her small hands on Eric's chest, forgetting to ask him to let go of her. Only then did Eric remember that this was the girl who had come to Los Angeles alone from the UK to attend the audition when he had met her by chance during the audition for Dark Battle. She was also the heroine of the amazing tango dance in Knowing a Woman by Smelling Her Scent. A middle-aged man turned into the corridor from the banquet hall with his head lowered and looked at the couple hugging strangely. Eric turned his head when he heard the commotion. The man recognized Eric's identity at a glance. He laughed dryly and quickly shrank back. Eric recognized that the man was an employee of Firefly. Although the man's reaction seemed a little extreme, it was not hard to imagine that he had discovered his boss being intimate with a woman who was obviously not his boss's official girlfriend. In such a situation, he had to leave to prevent himself from being bullied. "I'm really sorry for bumping into you just now, Miss Anwar." Eric was interrupted, and hurriedly let go of the petite girl. He even subconsciously brushed the hair that had fallen in front of the girl's forehead. It's okay." The girl shook her head. As Eric's fingers moved in front of her forehead, a faint blush appeared on her cheeks. However, Gabrielle was soon annoyed to find that the unromantic man apologized and walked away on his own accord. She gently stomped her feet and had no choice but to take the initiative to call out, "Hey!" Chapter 195. Eric stopped in his tracks and turned around. "Is there anything else, Miss Anwar?" After the girl shouted, she regretted it a little. She felt that she had acted a little too hastily. However, since she had already shouted, she could only muster up her courage and say, "Mr. Williams, can I invite you to dance with me later?" Eric looked at the girl's petite body wrapped in a deep red V-neck dress and the short leather shoes under her slender calves. He naturally thought of the amazing tango scene in Knowing a Woman by Smelling the Fragrance. He smiled and asked, "Is it tango?" Gabrielle nodded. The corners of her lips curled up, and there was a natural mischievousness in her smile. "If you want to." "Okay, wait a moment." Eric pointed to the end of the corridor. The girl nodded knowingly and watched as Eric turned to leave again. It was not until his figure disappeared behind a door that she quickly raised her small hand and patted her chest a few times. At the same time, her small head was quickly thinking about what she should say and do later to attract more attention from this man of the same age as her. After being lucky enough to get the role of the tango girl in Knowing a Woman by Smelling the Fragrance, Gabrielle had been in the United States for several months. As her understanding of Hollywood deepened, she became more determined to stay in Hollywood. Although the tango scene in Knowing a Woman by Smelling the Fragrance was only a few minutes long, due to Al Pacino's strict requirements, it took more than a week of filming in a New York hotel. During this time, the girl stayed with the crew the whole time. She was surprised to find that everyone in the crew, from the director to the stage manager, was polite to her. Although as a newcomer, she often made mistakes during the more than a week of filming, and some of her mistakes were even low-level. From beginning to end, the director, Martin Brest, and the male lead, Al Pacino, never got angry with her. At most, they frowned to express their dissatisfaction, but then began to patiently explain the essentials to her. In the beginning, Gabriel thought that the two men were good-tempered people. But on the third day of filming, an extra was distracted during the scene, causing a complicated scene to have to be repeated several times. Al Pacino was so angry that he smashed something and scolded the extra with harsh words. The extra was so angry that he left the crew in shame. Moreover, she later found that the director, Martin Brest, was not a good-tempered person. Therefore, he was curious as to why he had received such special treatment. It was only after a small incident that she understood the reason for everything. The cause of the incident was the young man named Matt Damon. After a few days of contact during the shoot, he developed a good impression of her, so he came over to chat her up. In the end, This matter was found out by Al Pacino. She saw with her own eyes that Al Pacino called the hothead into the room and gave him some instructions. After that, Matt Damon stopped paying attention to her. After this incident, the girl finally figured out something. It turned out that the reason she had received such treatment was that she had been recommended by Eric Williams. And more importantly, they might have thought that she was Eric's lover, so they treated her with courtesy. Because of this, as a newcomer actress, she had not encountered any of the harassment that she might have encountered. It seemed like a miracle. Even when she was in the UK, although her father and mother were in the television industry and could do their best to protect her, she still encountered harassment when she was acting in TV dramas. Because of this misunderstanding, she had gained a lot of benefits. Therefore, the girl had no intention of clarifying from beginning to end. Even when chatting with people, she always mentioned Eric's name as if nothing had happened, giving people some kind of hint. Now, most of the people who knew her, including her agent and even the general manager of the agency, Kapoor Sid, classified her as Eric's lover. And they did not look down on her because Eric Williams was now single. Maybe she would be lucky enough to be promoted to his official girlfriend, or even his wife. But she knew that she had nothing to do with Eric. She had only spoken a few words to him and met him once. As time went by, she even began to worry about what would happen to those who realized that they had been deceived once this fact was discovered. Especially the agent in charge of her. She did not know whether it was intentional or not, but these days, he had asked her several times if she had been on a date with Eric recently. "Hey, what are you thinking about?" A voice suddenly sounded in her ear, interrupting Gabrielle's thoughts. When the girl saw Eric appear in front of her, she quickly shook her head and said, "Nothing." "Let's go in," Eric said casually. He did not care. "Well, okay," the girl said. She boldly took a step forward and stretched out her arm to hold Eric's arm. Eric saw the girl's sudden intimate action and looked at her with interest. Gabrielle lowered her head, not daring to look into Eric's penetrating eyes, but she stubbornly did not let go of Eric's arm. Eric chuckled and did not expose the girl's thoughts. He just felt a little regretful that his arm did not feel as soft and comfortable as before. "Eric, I've decided that knowing women by smelling fragrance will be released by Firefly itself. I think what Robert said is very reasonable," Al Pacino said with a smile as he stepped into the hall again and saw Eric at a glance. Seeing Gabrielle leaning on him, Al Pacino did not shy away from the girl and winked at Eric. Eric had actually expected this result. Robert Shea could even persuade him, let alone Al Pacino. The more eager Al was for the award, the easier it was for him to listen to Robert Shea's words. For Al Pacino, who had missed out on many Oscars in a row, it was difficult for outsiders to understand his desire for an award. "I believe this will be a good choice," Eric nodded and said with a smile. "By the way, Al, do you have a plan for your next movie?" Al Pacino shook his head. "I plan to take a break for a while." Kapoor suggested the same. "2 movies this year are enough for me." Kapoor said that it's best for me to wait until after the next Oscars before considering my next movie. After that, Al Pacino paused and looked at Eric's expression. He immediately said, "But, Eric, if it's a movie you produce, I'm available at any time." "No, Al, I don't have any movies suitable for you recently," Eric explained. "Actually, you should have heard that I produced a TV series." Al immediately laughed. "Of course I've heard. I also know that you went to direct 2 episodes yourself. Eric, your ideas are really different. Among the directors I know, if it's not because they can't make a living, very few are willing to make a TV series. By the way, you said this is..." Eric said, "Actually, it's like this. I'm producing a sitcom, and I want to invite you to make a guest appearance in an episode." This, Al Pacino suddenly hesitated. It was not a big deal to make a guest appearance in a TV series, but he was worried about the reputation of the TV series Eric produced. If the ratings of that TV series were very bad, then making a guest appearance in it would be no different from acting in a bad movie. He still had lingering fears about the bad movie that caused him to quit acting a few years ago. Therefore, he cherished his reputation even more now and did not dare to agree immediately. Eric also knew that this matter could not be forced, so he said, "Al, this TV series will be broadcast as it is filmed. It just so happens that the premiere episode is on September 3rd on Fox TV. I know what you're worried about. How about this? If the average viewership of the TV series is less than 15 million, then forget about it. If it's higher than that, I hope you can consider it. Then I have no problem." Al Pacino immediately agreed when he heard Eric's promise. He still had a certain understanding of TV series. If an American TV series viewership exceeded 15 million, it would be considered a hit. His guest appearance in it would be in line with his identity, and it would also help to increase his popularity. Then it's settled. You can take some time to watch this TV series. Al smiled and said, "The first 2 episodes were personally filmed by you, the great director. I will definitely watch it on time. By the way, can you tell me what kind of role I will be playing?" "Of course, I want you to make a guest appearance as yourself." "Myself?" "Yes," Eric said. "The general plot is like this. Among the 6 fixed protagonists in my TV series, one of them is an extra. One day, he received a contract to play your new double. In the original episode, although Joey played Al Pacino's and there were a lot of jokes, Al Pacino did not appear from beginning to end. Now it was different. Since Eric had such a relationship with Al Pacino, of course, he had to make good use of it and let Al really appear on screen." "Wow." After listening to Eric's description, Al laughed. "Actually, if it's necessary, I don't mind appearing on screen naked." Eric shrugged. "You know, this is necessary for the plot." "Of course, I think this plot will be very interesting." "Oh, okay, Miss Anwar must be impatient. Sorry for taking up so much of Eric's time. You guys are going to dance, right?" "Eric, Miss Anwar's tango is very good." "Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Pacino." Gabriel did not show any impatience just now. How would she dare? Therefore, she was very grateful for Al Pacino's actions. "Then, enjoy the party. I'll go talk to the others for a while. Goodbye. See you later." Eric nodded and walked to the dance floor with the girl. Chapter 196. What have you been doing after filming Smell the Fragrance? On the dance floor, Eric held the girl's waist and swayed gently. Although he had just said that he wanted to dance the tango, in fact, he didn't. Because the music and atmosphere of the scene were not suitable, Eric wasn't that enthusiastic. What's more, even if he really wanted to dance, he didn't know how to do it at all. Gabrielle put her arm around Eric's shoulder and looked up at Eric. "My agent recommended me to be the second female lead in a romantic comedy. I have a lot of scenes and the pay is good. I have already passed the audition and will be joining the crew soon. The film may be released on Valentine's Day next year." "Oh, not bad. Work hard. Not everyone can get a role so easily when they come to Hollywood. Many young boys and girls have been in Hollywood for several years, and they can't even get some minor roles. Most of them can only return home empty-handed. Less than 1% can stay." Eric stared into the girl's eyes with a smile. Through the girl's words, he was more certain of the reason why Gabrielle had done those little tricks before. She obviously did it deliberately. Her purpose was to cause misunderstandings. This kind of misunderstanding was the most difficult to explain because the explanation was bound to be taken as a cover-up. Thinking of this, Eric smiled and looked at Gabrielle. He asked, "So, what do I get in return?" I don't know what you are talking about." The girl's body stiffened for a moment. Apparently, she realized that Eric had discovered her little trick. Her eyes flickered as she replied softly. But, how could she not know? She was just like an ostrich burying its head in the sand. She wanted to deliberately ignore it. However, if it were not for him, how could she, an English girl who came to Hollywood alone, with no connections, no background, and not very good acting skills, get 2 important roles in just half a year? Moreover, UTA must have misunderstood her identity, so they took care of her and got her the role of the second female lead in the romantic comedy. Following Eric's movements, the girl looked around worriedly. There were still many people on the dance floor. Although the lights were not bright enough, it didn't affect her vision at all. As long as she paid a little attention, she would definitely be able to see Eric's hateful movements. How could he do this? Even if he wanted it, it shouldn't be here. The girl thought so in her heart, but she could only bury her head in front of Eric and play the role of an ostrich again. Fortunately, Eric didn't go too far. After punishing the girl a little, he let her go. However, when Gabrielle secretly looked around, she still saw the meaningful looks in the eyes of several people around her. A few female celebrities who knew about Eric's identity saw the intimate posture between Eric and the girl, and their faint disdain towards Gabrielle hid unconcealable envy in their eyes. If it were possible, they would definitely not mind replacing the woman in Eric's arms with one of them. That little B*TCH still looks so reluctant. She's really a B*TCH. A young female star on the dance floor saw Gabriel's expression and cursed in her heart. After the party started, she took the initiative to strike up a conversation with Eric, but unfortunately, Eric didn't even have the intention to chat with her. Eric didn't mind the looks of others at all. After all, his reputation as a playboy had already spread. He motioned for Gabrielle to raise her head and said without any doubt, "Come on, look at me. I like this expression." Gabrielle's body was so weak that she couldn't and didn't dare to resist. She obediently raised her head and stared at Eric with her charming slender eyes. Her small mouth was slightly open, and she gently exhaled hot air. When Eric saw the girl's appearance, he nodded with satisfaction. He pinched the girl's small chin, then continued to gently dance with the body in front of him. "Actually, this is not bad," Eric said after a while, as if he had figured something out. The girl showed a puzzled expression. She didn't know why Eric suddenly said such an inexplicable sentence. Eric said faintly, "It's not easy for a girl like you to come to Hollywood alone, so if someone asks about your relationship with me, I won't deny it. Just treat it as a kind of protection for you. After all, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have been able to stay in Hollywood. Since I changed your life, I seem to have a little responsibility to make your development in Hollywood smoother. Of course, this is all the help I can provide. In the future, you will have to rely on your own efforts." "Thank you, Mr. Williams," the girl said with a grateful expression and tightened her arms around Eric's waist. "Thank you." "Call me Eric," Eric said casually, and then his tone became solemn again. "However, that's all. Remember to play your part. Don't let me know that you are using my name to do things that you shouldn't do." The girl eagerly promised, "I won't, I definitely won't." Being able to get such a promise already made her overjoyed. "That's good." Eric smiled. "Don't be so nervous. In fact, even if you want to do something, it won't be too easy. I'm just reminding you in advance." "Okay." The girl leaned her body against Eric's body and answered softly. "By the way, do you have any hobbies?" Eric suddenly asked without rhyme or reason. Gabriel didn't know why Eric would ask such a question. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "Reading, dancing, and maybe sleeping. If there's nothing to do, I'll sleep for the whole day. Actually, I'm very lazy." Eric showed a dissatisfied expression, shook his head, and said, "That won't do." "Then plant a pot of flowers, so that I can often help you with it." The girl blinked and then laughed out loud. She took the initiative to tease him, "I have a cactus at home. Is that okay?" Eric also laughed. In fact, this was just a little joke. If he wanted to go to a woman's house, what reason did he need to find? But now, Eric said seriously, raising a cactus also requires skill. "How about we go and see it now?" "Of course." The girl gently winked at Eric. The two quickly left the party, and under Gabrielle's lead, they came to a small apartment in West Hollywood. Because Eric hadn't been home, when the two just arrived at Gabrielle's place, the mobile phone that Eric carried with him rang. It was a call from Drew. She also told Eric a piece of good news. She had obtained the rights to several movies and couldn't wait to let Eric go back to take a look. In this case, of course, Eric couldn't go back. Anyway, since he had obtained the rights, he couldn't fly away. Eric didn't say where he was, so he could only chat with the girl for a while. I know. Okay, be good, I'm very busy right now. It's nothing, I accidentally kicked it on the coffee table. Okay, I know, I'll go back tomorrow to get it. Go to bed early. What are you kissing me for, little girl? Go to bed early. Chapter 197. The sunlight that seeped in through the gaps in the curtains showed a bit of a bright feeling. In the early morning of September in Los Angeles, the temperature was just about 22 degrees. Eric remembered that this was the golden temperature that the human body could tolerate. He quietly found his clothes and put them on while looking at the girl who was still sleeping soundly. Because the blanket was scattered to the side, the girl's naked body was unreservedly displayed in front of Eric. Because of her Oriental ancestry, the girl's skeleton looked delicate and small, and her skin was smoother and more delicate than Western women. Even after Eric finished tying his tie and putting on his coat, the girl showed no signs of waking up. Eric looked at the cute way the girl was sleeping with her right thumb in her mouth like a baby. He couldn't help but feel a little excited as he gently sat down beside the girl. As if she felt Eric's breath, Gabrielle suddenly opened her eyes. Ah! Gabrielle quickly jumped up and pulled the blanket to cover her body. After seeing Eric's smiling face, she recalled what happened last night and breathed a sigh of relief. Good morning, Eric. The girl seemed to be a little apologetic for losing her composure. She immediately smiled and took the initiative to greet him. Good morning, Eric smiled and shook his finger at the girl. I didn't expect you to be so cute when you sleep. Am I? The girl lowered her head shyly. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw Eric's movements and remembered some scenes from last night. Eric smiled and nodded. Of course, it's the first time I've seen a girl who likes to bite her finger when she sleeps. I don't know. The girl's eyelids were still lowered. She gently glanced around as if she was looking for something. Eric considerately gathered a few clothes and handed them to the girl. He casually said, "This is nothing." In fact, many people don't know that they snore when they sleep, and they don't even admit it when they wake up. Gabrielle, who was about to secretly put on her underwear, looked up in horror. I'm not snoring, right? If something like this happened to her, she would never have the face to see her again. Of course not. Eric quickly shook his head. Seeing that Gabriel seemed to be extremely frightened, he quickly explained with a smile, "Don't worry, I was just giving an example." Oh. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and gently put on her clothes. Seeing the girl put on her underwear and walk barefoot to the wardrobe, Eric said, "Baby, I think I have to go." Gabrielle, who was standing beside the wardrobe and thinking about what to wear today, paused and turned her head. Her eyes were filled with anticipation as she asked softly, "Eric, can't we have breakfast?" Eric looked at his watch and said, "It's almost 8:30 now, and there might be a traffic jam on the road. I don't know if I can get to the company by 9. I have to fly to Venice at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so there are some things I need to deal with quickly. At 10 o'clock, I have a meeting with Robert and Jeffrey about the merger of Firefly and New Line. My new movie schedule is also out, and I need to take a look at it personally. In short, I have a lot of things to deal with in the next 5 hours. Seeing the girl twiddling her fingers in disappointment, Eric's tone softened as he spoke. He even felt a sense of heartless guilt in his heart. He waved his hand and gestured, Is there a breakfast restaurant nearby? Maybe we can have breakfast together. 10 or 20 minutes won't make much of a difference. Of course, can I wash my face first? The girl looked up in surprise and nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Since he had already made up his mind, Eric didn't care about the time. He said, "Take a shower, but it's best if you hurry, I don't have much time." Then wait a minute. The girl excitedly picked out a few clothes, tiptoed into the bathroom, and came out again in less than 15 minutes. She was already wearing a light blue one-shoulder dress, and black stockings made her legs look slender and long. Her hair was tied into a small bun, and she casually picked a pair of high heels from the shoe rack next to her. She stood up and said to Eric, "Okay, let's go. The restaurant is just 40 or 50 steps across the street." The two left the apartment like an ordinary couple who got up early. They found a small restaurant according to Gabrielle's instructions and had breakfast together. Only then did Eric leave with Gabrielle reluctantly. When Eric appeared at the company, Jeffrey asked anxiously, "Eric, it's almost 9:30. What's wrong with you today? Your mobile phone is also turned off. Don't you know how tight the time is today?" Eric had always maintained a very regular lifestyle and had never been late. Today, there were so many important things waiting for him, but he was unexpectedly late. No wonder Jeffrey was anxious. Facing the anxious old man, Eric explained awkwardly, "Sorry, Jeffrey, there was a traffic jam." Jeffrey immediately retorted, "That's impossible. There's no traffic jam from where you live to here. It's not like I don't know this road." "Actually, I came from West Hollywood." Eric immediately raised his hands and explained honestly. "Ah." Jeffrey was stunned and quickly understood something. At the same time, he realized that he had overstepped his boundaries. After all, Eric was his boss. Although he knew that Eric would not mind if he was a little harsh, he was not Eric's elder after all. Occasionally, when he lectured Eric, Eric would not say anything out of respect for him, but after a long time, anyone would be dissatisfied. With a soft sigh, Jeffrey could only relax and say, "Well, there are a few documents that need your signature. I have asked Alan to categorize them and put them on your desk. You have half an hour to deal with them. Robert is almost here with his people. I'll go to the conference room to prepare. I'll deal with it now." Eric nodded to Jeffrey and walked quickly to his office. Jeffrey also went to prepare his own things. Although the merger agreement had been signed, the two companies still needed to deal with a lot of issues such as business integration, management and organizational design, company structure adjustment, and staff integration and dismissal. Therefore, it would take several months for the two companies to truly merge. During this period, the business of both sides could not be stopped. There would be a period of parallel operations. After hurriedly processing a few documents, the assistant knocked on the door. Eric hurriedly put down the folder and walked to the conference room. In the conference room, in addition to Robert Shea, there were 6 or 7 mid-level and high-level executives attending the meeting. On the other hand, at Firefly, there were only a few clerks in charge of recording the meeting and only Eric and Jeffrey. This comparison showed that Firefly's foundation was very weak. Although the profitability of New Line was far less than that of Firefly, the various businesses were very complete. There was no lack of production, copyright, publicity, distribution, and various other departments. Looking at Firefly, if one did not look at its terrifying profitability, it was actually more like a small workshop. Jeffrey was in charge of management and was also the producer of Eric's movie. Although he was sometimes very busy, most of the time, he was more than enough to do it alone. In fact, not much was discussed in the 2-hour meeting. Other than quickly reaching an agreement on finding another office as soon as possible and moving the two companies together, there was a debate about the power of production. Of course, Eric hoped that Robert Shea would completely let go of this area and focus on the distribution of movies. If the distribution ability was strong, coupled with his vision in movies, Firefly could leap to the status of a movie giant in a few years. However, this proposal was directly rejected by Robert Shea. This was also expected. The power of production was the most important power of a movie company's executives. At the same time, it was also the foundation of all movie companies. Wouldn't it be a joke if the helmsman of a movie company did not even have the power of production? Eric then suggested that Robert Shea could be in charge of the production of some low-budget horror movies. After all, this could be considered his strength. To Eric's surprise, Robert Shea still refused. Not only was he not satisfied with the power of production of low-budget movies, but he also hoped to be in charge of a few big productions. This was because he knew that with the income from Eric's next few movies, Firefly would have a large amount of cash. Although Robert Shea did not dare to play like this when he was in the New Line, after all, the New Line would almost go bankrupt if they lost a big production. However, Now that he had the backing of Firefly's funds, Robert Shaye's ambition swelled. After all, there were not many low-budget, high-box office dark horse movies in Hollywood. Otherwise, Eric's results would not be so amazing. In order to obtain stable and high returns, big investments and big productions were the way to go. Of course, Eric would not agree to Robert Shaye's wishes. Firefly was rich, but this was not the way to play. Moreover, he had no confidence in Robert Shaye's vision. Although the New Line in his previous life had the great success of the Lord of the Rings series, it also had the disastrous failure of The Golden Compass. Looking at it all together, it seemed that Robert Shaye was more of a lucky guy in terms of movie production. However, in the face of Robert Shaye's insistence, Eric had no choice but to give in for the time being. After all, what he needed most now was for the distribution channels to be in the other party's hands. Therefore, the first priority was to integrate the New Line completely. A temporary loss of power was inevitable. In the end, Eric reluctantly agreed. In the next year, he would give the New Line 2 big-budget movies with a total cost of less than $50 million. He would give full authority to Robert Shaye. After the 2-hour meeting, Robert Shaye and the others left satisfied. Eric continued to flip through the documents while eating a simple lunch. He would be leaving for the airport later, so he had to finish reading the 2 documents that needed to be signed as soon as possible. Chapter 198. Jeffrey did not leave either. Instead, he sat on the sofa in Eric's office and ate his lunch. At the same time, he discussed some issues with Eric. Eric, other than Dark War, the cost of all our movies is less than $25 million. Don't you think it's too much to give Robert Shaye a budget of $50 million for 2 movies? Hearing this question, Eric's face tensed up. He finished his lunch in a few mouthfuls and pushed it aside. He took out a tissue and wiped his mouth. I don't want to, but if I want Robert to do his best, I have to give him some benefits first. It's only $50 million. Although I said that I would give him full authority, if Robert's movie is not good enough, I definitely won't sign the project proposal. Jeffrey did not doubt Eric's judgment in movies at all. Hearing Eric's words, he was relieved. However, Eric, it's not a good thing for Robert to have too much power. There's nothing to worry about. Eric signed his name on a document and quickly switched to the next one. As he browsed through it carefully, he said, "Once we've integrated the resources of the New Line and completely integrated the New Line with the Fireflies, the rest will be much simpler." Jeffrey's heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, this little guy is really black-hearted. He's already thinking about getting rid of Robert Shaye. However, Eric did have the ability to do so. After all, Robert Shaye only had 15% of the shares, and Eric had absolute control of the shares. If he wanted to remove Robert Shaye from his position, he did not even need to go through a meeting. He could just sign a document. Do you think I'm getting rid of him after he's outlived his usefulness? Eric smiled and looked up at Jeffrey. Jeffrey smiled awkwardly, but he still admitted generously. I do feel that way. You know, Jeffrey, I'm not a heartless person. If Robert could play his part and do things within his capabilities, I would definitely not do something like beating up the chef after a meal. Unfortunately, he is too ambitious. You must have noticed that he brought so many people here today as a demonstration. He wants to tell us that he is very important to Firefly. I'm suddenly worried. Upon hearing Eric's words, Jeffrey said, "Look, those people today are all Robert's subordinates. If you chase him away in the future, will they leave with him?" Eric shook his head and said with a relaxed expression, "Do you think that if Firefly develops, those people under him will give up their annual salary and bonuses of tens of millions of yuan and leave with him to start a new business? Or perhaps, there were a few other big movie companies with so many vacant positions that they could poach them all? None of that is possible. Now that Robert has left, I'll just find another CEO to take over the distribution channels that have already been perfected." But, Eric interrupted Jeffrey and said patiently, "Jeffrey, actually, you don't have to worry so much. I said that I might chase Robert away, but that's not necessarily the case. Maybe in a year or two, he will realize his strengths and stop interfering with the production and concentrate on the distribution. I won't have to do this kind of thing. Robert's talent in the distribution of movies is still unquestionable. I understand. Jeffrey nodded helplessly and began to eat with his head lowered. There were a few knocks on the door, but before he could get permission, the office door was pushed open. Drew, who was wearing a t-shirt and hot pants, flew in and threw herself on Eric, laughing and joking. She even leaned close to Eric's ear and asked about what happened last night. Alan, who was standing at the door, patiently smiled as he watched the girl and Eric fool around. When Eric turned his attention to him, he said, "Eric, the luggage and car are ready. I think it's best for us to set off now to avoid special situations like traffic jams on the road." "Then let's go." Eric pulled the girl down from his lap. "Be good while I'm away. If there's anything, you can ask Jeffrey for help. Don't mess around. Tisk, I'm not a child." The girl scratched Eric unhappily and said, "Eric, I want to go to Venice too." "Forget it, you won't be able to stand it." Eric rubbed the girl's fluffy head. He didn't know what the girl was thinking recently, but she had cut her hair into a cute bun. Eric couldn't help but rub it a few more times. It takes 17 hours to fly from Los Angeles to Venice, and we still have to transfer planes in between. Drew really couldn't stand it. She probably wouldn't be able to stand doing nothing on the plane for 17 hours, so she didn't mention it again. She held Eric's arm and walked out as she said, "Eric, let's buy a private jet, okay? That way, we won't be bored no matter how long we fly." "It's not the time yet." Eric shook his head. "Let's wait for another year or two." "Okay." Drew nodded. The group went downstairs, and the girl got into the MPV first. "I'll send you to the airport." "Eric, I won't be going. I still have something to do later." Jeffrey patted Eric's shoulder. "Have a safe trip." "Goodbye, Jeffrey." Eric waved at Jeffrey and got into the MPV. Alan, who was in front, got into the front passenger seat. When he saw Eric and Drew in the back, he instructed the driver to drive. He wanted to go to Venice with Eric, and he originally needed to find a translator. Venice spoke Italian. Coincidentally, Alan's mother happened to be Italian. Alan grew up in both English and Italian, so he had no problem speaking Italian. Therefore, he didn't need to find a translator. Fortunately, it only took 1 hour and 10 minutes to drive from Burbank to Los Angeles International Airport. When they arrived, there was still half an hour before boarding time. Eric and Alan could calmly check in. "Alan, what are you looking at?" Eric asked curiously when he saw Alan checking his backpack carefully while waiting to board the plane. "Books. I brought a collection of Stephen King's novels. I plan to read it on the plane." "Eric, did you bring it?" Eric spread his hands. He often took long-distance trains in his previous life, but the environment on the train was not suitable for reading. He had never taken a long-distance plane before, so he didn't think of this. Moreover, his luggage was packed by the little girl yesterday. With the little girl's personality, it was even more impossible for her to think of it. "There are still a few minutes left. Maybe we can buy one." "There's a super mall outside the hall," Alan suggested. "I'll go." "Eric, you guys wait here. If I can't make it back in time, you guys can just board the plane." Eric was about to say that there was no need for the trouble, but the little girl had already flown out. As soon as Drew ran out of the departure hall, Eric and Alan heard the broadcast informing them to board the plane. The two of them looked at each other. "Let's go. Let's line up first." "Maybe we can make it," Eric said. Alan did not refute. The two of them pulled their luggage and walked to the boarding gate. 10 minutes later, only Eric and Alan were left at the boarding gate. The other passengers had already entered, and the staff next to them began to remind them to go in. Eric took a last look behind him. A shadow was running toward them. The little girl directly stuffed a thick hardcover book into Eric's hand. Without saying anything, she bent down and waved her hand to signal them to go in directly. Eric knew that there was no need to be polite with the little girl. He stuffed the book into his satchel, said goodbye, and pulled his luggage into the boarding gate. The huge Boeing jet left the ground with a roar, and it took a while for it to stabilize. In the first-class cabin, Eric unfastened his seat belt. Alan beside him also took out a schedule and introduced it to Eric. After a transfer in London, we will arrive in Venice on September 2nd at 3 p.m. local time. Mr. Damy and Ms. Madsen said that they will pick us up at Marco Polo Airport. We have a meeting with director John Landis in the evening. There are no events on the 3rd, so you can rest for a day to get over your jet lag. The red carpet for the opening ceremony of the film festival on the 4th, and the organizing committee invites you to the party after that. Our flight is on the 5th afternoon, and we will arrive in Los Angeles at 5 a.m. Eastern Time on the 6th. Eric, is there anything else you need to note? Eric listened patiently and shook his head. No, that's it. If possible, he had not planned to attend the Venice Film Festival. Although he had this plan, as his schedule became more and more tight, he did not want to attend. However, when the Venice Film Festival learned that he might appear, they took the initiative to send him an official invitation, hoping that he would attend the opening ceremony. Originally, Eric did not covet the award, so it was fine for Eric to postpone it. However, with the publicity strategy proposed by Michael Eisner, the film had hope of winning an award. In this case, Eric could not refuse. Because the invitation was personally signed by the chairman of the jury, Andrei Zemanov, and it was full of sincerity. If Eric didn't give the other party face, it would leave a bad impression in the other party's heart. Compared to the thousands of judges at the Oscars, the Venice Film Festival only had 9 judges. Everyone sat together to discuss the awards and decided to distribute them. Therefore, in order to avoid the tragedy of Island Horror, going home empty-handed because of his personal reasons, Eric had to make a trip. Eric sighed helplessly and stopped thinking about these annoying things. He took out the book that Su Qianxi bought for him from his backpack. After taking a look, he couldn't help but chuckle. Walden. What kind of book did this girl buy? Who would read prose on the plane? Forget it, I'll just treat it as hypnosis. Eric opened the plastic wrap wrapped around the book and thought. Chapter 199. After changing flights in London, Eric and Vera finally arrived at Marco Polo Airport in Venice after more than 2 hours of flight. Jonathan Dimy and Virginia were not the only ones who came to pick them up. There was also a middle-aged man named Bill Garlot and 2 assistants. After some introductions, Eric learned that Bill Garlot was the manager of Disney's European branch. Since Disney had obtained the distribution rights of Island Horror, Bill Garlot was sent to assist Jonathan Dimy in the promotion and public relations of the film. After exchanging greetings, Eric and the others boarded a yacht with their luggage. Instead of going to the main island of Venice, they went directly to Lido Island and checked into a boutique hotel. This hotel was very interesting. It was said that the reason why the Venice Film Festival was established was to solve the problem of the boutique hotel's autumn customers. Now, the boutique hotel had become a symbol of status during the Venice Film Festival. Only the film crews selected for the main competition unit and the specially invited crew could stay in this hotel. As one of the important guests of this film festival, Eric certainly had the right to stay, and his room was a luxury suite with a view of the sea. I really want to have a good sleep. After Jonathan, Bill, and the others left, Eric let out a long sigh and threw himself onto the bedroom wall, rolling a few times with all his might. Virginia, who was carefully packing Eric's luggage, chuckled. Was the flight tiring? I'm not tired, but I feel terrible. I even encountered turbulence in the Atlantic Ocean. At that time, I was really scared. That's the ocean. If I were lucky enough not to die after falling in, I'd probably be salted by the ocean. Eric kicked off his leather shoes and leaned comfortably on the bed. He turned his head and looked at the girl hanging his clothes in the wardrobe. At this time, Virginia was wearing a small, sleeveless white blouse with lace and tight white trousers. Looking from the side, this dress set off the girl's figure incisively and vividly. Eric seemed to have thought of something. He stood up and was about to move when Virginia stopped him. Eric, don't do this. They are waiting for us in the restaurant downstairs. Eric also knew that it was not the right time, so he had to give up his plan and whispered, come to my room tonight." "This won't do." The woman could feel Eric's aura, but she still had to reject him. "It won't be good if someone sees us. Wait until we get back to Los Angeles, then. Okay?" "Okay." Eric was just suddenly interested. He quickly realized that the hotel was full of film crews from all over the world, as well as the judges of the film festival. If someone caught him and Virginia having a private meeting, it would indeed cause unpredictable consequences. Unwilling to give up, he raised his hand to hit the girl a few times before saying with a smile, "You look really good in this dress." The girl turned around and kissed Eric's cheek. She smiled and said, "Then I'll wear it often for you to see." "Actually," Eric whispered into the girl's ear mysteriously, lowering his voice and whispering a few words. Virginia thought that Eric was going to say something important. She did not expect him to tease her. She rolled her eyes and knocked on Eric's shoulder. "Little rascal." Eric laughed a few times and picked up the jacket that the girl had just dropped on the ground. "Let me help you clean up. Don't let them wait too long." The two of them tidied up Eric's mind together before going downstairs to the restaurant. "Eric, this is John Landis's information. You'd better take a look at it before the meeting tonight." In the hotel restaurant, Eric, Jonathan, and the others sat around a table. Bill Garlot from Disney handed him a document. Eric already had a general understanding of John Landis's resume. However, he knew that the information given by Disney would definitely be more detailed. Therefore, he took the document and opened it in front of everyone. He asked casually, "What's the general situation about Island Horror?" Jonathan Dime and Bill Garlot looked at each other. In the end, Bill Garlot said, "We've already made sufficient preparations. We've even contacted a few of the judges this year. Although we didn't get any promises, a few of the judges have a good impression of Shock Island. At the same time, we have also contacted some local media. After the film festival starts, they will cooperate with public opinion publicity." "Okay." Eric nodded with satisfaction. In fact, for a film festival like Venice, this was enough for the public relations department. After thinking about it, Eric asked, "What about the awards? Which awards are you mainly doing the public relations activities for now?" Bill Garlot said, "There's definitely no hope for the Golden Lion. City of Sorrow is almost a foregone conclusion. Shock Island has no chance of winning the Golden Lion no matter what. Looking at the current situation, we have more hope for the Silver Lion and the Best Screenwriter. Since we've been nominated for the main competition, based on the usual practice of the Venice Film Festival, it's unlikely that we'll return empty-handed." After Bill finished speaking, Jonathan Dime and the others looked at Eric in unison. He was going to meet with one of the judges tonight, John Landis. They would definitely talk about this issue. John Landis had already agreed to help fight for Island Horror after being contacted by Disney. After all, he was an American, and he was not one of those stubborn old men who insisted on art. John Landis was a commercial director from the beginning to the end. As for this meeting, Eric didn't know who had proposed it first. Perhaps it was John Landis who was interested in him, or perhaps it was Jonathan Dime or Bill Garlot who had stirred things up. However, since it was good for Island Horror, Eric did not ask and agreed readily. Eric's choice in the meeting meant that John Landis would fight for Island Horror during the award judging. Moreover, based on the theme of Island Horror, even with the anti-war gimmick, the jury would only give it one award at most. Therefore, they could only fight for one of the two awards. From the bottom of his heart, Eric hoped to win a Best Screenplay award of his own. However, for the sake of the film's box office, he had to focus on the Silver Lion, which was relatively more influential. "Don't worry, I know what to do," said Eric, looking at the expectant faces. Chapter 200. Everyone seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. They were also worried that Eric would stubbornly choose the Best Screenplay award. After all, Eric had now achieved achievements in the box office that most people would never be able to achieve in their lifetime. Therefore, his desire for individual film awards would be stronger. If Island Horror won the Silver Lion, it would belong to the entire team. If he won the Best Screenplay award, it would definitely belong to Eric alone. Eric, it's actually nothing. I think the Oscars are your real stage. As if to appease Eric, Bill Garlot said so. Jonathan Demme also nodded. Eric shrugged non-committally. Thank you, Bill. If only those stubborn old men at the Film Academy thought so too. They all laughed and talked about a few more things before parting ways. Eric returned to his room with the information about John Landis. This time, in order to avoid suspicion, Virginia didn't follow, and Alan stayed in another suite downstairs. There were still a few hours before night fell in Venice, and it was still morning in the eastern United States. Therefore, although he had spent more than 10 hours on the plane, Eric did not feel tired at all. After reading the information about John Landis, Eric stayed in his room until 7 o'clock in the evening. He changed his clothes and went out alone. The agreed place was in a restaurant near the boutique hotel. Eric did not need anyone to guide him, and he did not bring a female companion. Virginia was the heroine of Island Horror. Under such circumstances, if she was seen eating with the judges, it would definitely cause bad rumors. In comparison, Eric's identity was less of a concern. There were not many people who could recognize him here. John Landis was about 40 years old. He wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses, a big nose, and a full beard. He looked like a standard Jew. Another Jew. Eric sighed in his heart. According to the information, John Landis and Steven Spielberg were good friends, and the two of them had made cameo appearances in each other's films. Moreover, John Landis was a director who became famous around the same time as Spielberg. In 1975, Spielberg became a top director in Hollywood with Jaws, and 3 years later, John Landis' Animal House earned more than $100 million at the box office. Coincidentally, both of them became famous at the age of 28. However, according to Eric's analysis, John Landis's career as a director began to decline in the 90s. Therefore, Eric did not have much of an impression of this director in his previous life. In the restaurant, John Landis ordered and watched with interest as Eric communicated with the blonde waitress who happened to speak English. After the waitress left with the menu, John Landis said, "Eric, you're very familiar with Italian food." Eric smiled and explained, "My father used to be an Italian chef." Oh. John Landis nodded and did not continue the topic. Obviously, he was not completely ignorant of Eric and knew that Eric's father had passed away. While waiting for the dishes to be served, Eric and John Landis began to chat. Of course, the topic was still movies. The reason why I find it strange is not because of the variety of your movie styles, but because your movies with different styles have achieved box office success. That's the most difficult thing to understand. You know, I've tried all kinds of movies, but the few movies that did well at the box office were all satirical comedies. Even Steven has been trying to break through for so many years, but his most successful movies are only sci-fi movies like Jaws, A.T., and so on. Eric said, "That doesn't mean anything, John. Maybe I'm just lucky. I've only directed a few movies so far. When I make a few more, I'll definitely encounter failures. By then, I'll realize what I'm best at." John Landis listened to Eric's words and thought for a while. Suddenly, he shook his head and said, "It's different. You give me a very different feeling. Eric, can you tell me where you learned how to make movies? I'm very curious. After all, at your age, even a simple movie like Home Alone wouldn't be easy to make. From the time I entered the industry to the time I made my first movie, it took me several years to accumulate experience." Of course, Eric couldn't say that he had accumulated it in his previous life. He could only say, "Actually, I was lucky. I wrote the script for Home Alone, and then I was lucky enough to find a very good team. I only needed to say what effect I wanted, and they helped me create it. If I hadn't met them, perhaps Home Alone would not have existed." John Landis did not doubt Eric's words. Normally, Eric's personal experience could only be attributed to his good luck. "I've watched Home Alone several times. That Stuart Runkle, right? The little guy is really good. If there's a chance. Forget it, I'd better not. Eric knew why John Landis said this from the information he had read before. 7 years ago, when he was making a movie, several actors died because of an accident, including 2 underage actors. If there were no underage actors, it would have been a very simple accident on set. After all, many such accidents happened in Hollywood every year. However, because of the 2 children, he was dragged into a lawsuit for 6 years. It was not until last year that he completely got out of the lawsuit. Therefore, it was not difficult to understand why John Landis was afraid of the underage actors. John, actually, you don't have to worry too much. That incident is in the past, isn't it? Moreover, it was really just a sad accident. John Landis took a sip of red wine and said in a low voice, "But they insisted that I was guilty of manslaughter. This is too much. I'm just a producer. I wasn't even present when the accident happened. I apologized to the public and made enough compensation, but some people just wouldn't let it go. It took me a full 6 years to get out of it. For a while, I even wanted to escape abroad like Roman Polanski. I don't want to go to jail." Eric remembered the incident mentioned in the information and gradually sensed something else from John Landis's tone. Whether or not Roman Polanski was set up, he deserved it. After all, he was caught red-handed violating minors. However, the incident with John Landis was full of conspiracy. Perhaps someone wanted to destroy him. If a competitor fell, a large portion of the box office would be freed up. After all, although John Landis was not as famous as Spielberg, 2 of his movies in the past few years had exceeded 100 million at the box office. Some of his other movies had also done well. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but feel a chill in his heart. John Landis was Jewish. There must be a whole circle of Jews in Hollywood who would support him. Such a person could be set up and dragged into a lawsuit for 6 years, let alone himself. He was now alone in Hollywood. If someone wanted to deal with him, it would be terrible. Quickly shaking the worry out of his mind, Eric knew that it was not the time to worry. He said to John Landis, "Don't think about these things anymore, John. It's all in the past, isn't it? You see, last year's trip to the United States was actually the most direct counterattack." When John Landis heard Eric mention his proud work, he smiled. Indeed, not long after A Trip to the United States was released, the incident was completely over. However, if it weren't for the success of A Trip to the United States, I don't know how long I would have been delayed. After this topic, John Landis also felt a sense of intimacy with Eric. "Eric, I've watched Island Horror several times. Whether it was the suspense setting or the final plot twist, it was amazing. In May, the Cannes Film Festival just selected the youngest Best Director. I believe that the Venice Film Festival will definitely not be too conservative." Hearing John Landis say this, Eric knew that John Landis might be inclined to help him lobby for the Best Screenplay award, so he quickly shook his head and said, "John, I'm only 19 years old now. I don't think too much about the honor. If I get recognized too early, I won't have much motivation to move forward in the future. What do you think?" John Landis was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly smiled and nodded. "I understand." Eric also smiled and raised his glass of wine. John Landis knew that Eric was thanking him. He also raised his glass and clinked it with Eric's. He said softly, "Don't worry, I'll try my best." Eric didn't answer. He drank the red wine in his glass in one gulp. Putting down the wine glass, Eric was about to talk to John Landis about other topics when he suddenly heard a familiar female voice not far behind him. She said faintly, "Haha, that fat man just now was so funny. He actually said that I looked like... Haha, he even said that he was a director. But you're too mean." Raising his eyebrows, Eric could not help but look at the source of the voice. The back of a woman with brown curly hair appeared in his sight. Eric smiled. He did not expect Julia to come to Venice. The woman sitting opposite her must be the second daughter of the Murdoch family, Elizabeth Murdoch. "Why, did you meet an acquaintance?" John Landis followed Eric's gaze, but he was not familiar with Julia. If they were face to face, he might recognize the woman, but he could not recognize her just by looking at her back. Eric nodded. 2 acquaintances, but they probably don't want me to go over and say hello. I'll just ignore them. John Landis looked at the 2 girls not far away and smiled ambiguously. You always have to take the initiative when you're chasing girls. Sitting here won't bring any girls to you. Chapter 201. After dinner, John Landis originally wanted to have coffee with Eric and talk about some other things. However, when he saw the 2 girls sitting not far behind Eric, John Landis took the initiative to considerately leave. When he left, he even winked at Eric and made a cheering gesture, which made Eric not know whether to laugh or cry. He knew that John Landis must have misunderstood, but there was no way to explain this kind of thing. Otherwise, it would only make things worse. After John left, Eric called the waiter. After paying the bill, he turned to look at Julia and Elizabeth, who were not far away. If he wanted to leave, he would definitely have to pass by the 2 girls. The possibility of not being recognized was almost zero. Thinking back to Julia's drunken nonsense that night, Eric felt a little helpless. He was now a little confused about Julia's situation. Did the girl really have feelings for him, or was it because of some mental illness that caused her to submit to him? However, one thing was certain. The girl clearly wanted to get rid of this feeling. Eric did not lack women, although he would try his best to keep the women he liked by his side. However, Julia was not the type he particularly liked, so he did not want to get involved with the girl. The waiter brought the change and receipt. Eric paid the tip, stood up, and walked directly to Julia's table. Since I can't avoid her, I'll just greet her. As Eric walked closer, Elizabeth was the first to notice him. The girl was stunned, but she calmly picked up her coffee to hide the surprised expression on her face. As such, Julia didn't notice the change in Elizabeth's expression. She continued to chatter softly, looking very excited. Although Julia was 3 years older than him, the girl had always been a little reserved when she was around him. It was rare for her to talk so much. Therefore, Eric was very curious about what the girl was talking about. He made a shushing gesture to Elizabeth, and Eric quietly walked behind Julia. The producer told me, Julia, we will be shooting in the studio the whole time. Even if it's a real scene, I can use a stunt double and comfortably finish the film. Also, if you are not satisfied with the script, you can edit it yourself. I was very excited when I heard that. They personally came to a small town in the south and came to me with such sincerity. They even offered me a high price of $5 million USD. I felt that I had never been so valued before. So I asked them to send the script over, but when I saw the name of the female lead, I couldn't stand it. Can you imagine, Liz? They actually named the female lead Vivian. My God, it's too obvious that they are following the trend. I suggested that the producer change the name first, but he said that the plot can be changed, but the name can't be changed. He also told me a lot of benefits. I remembered some of the things he told me about following the trend, so Listening to Julia's rapid speech, Eric, who was standing behind the girl, smiled faintly. Elizabeth, who was sitting opposite Julia, smiled and interrupted the girl's words. She asked the obvious, Julia, who is this he you're talking about? Julia seemed to be a little thirsty. She took a few sips of juice and said, Oh, you know. Although that guy is a bastard, many of the things he said are quite reasonable. Oh. Elizabeth raised her chin and glanced at Eric, who was standing behind the girl with his hands in his trouser pockets. So, you've completely gotten rid of that guy's shadow? Of course. Julia waved her small hand without hesitation and raised her voice slightly. I've already pulled that bastard's shadow out of his head, crumpled it into a ball, and flushed it down the toilet. Pfft. Elizabeth couldn't hold it in anymore. She covered her mouth in panic and threw herself on the table. She shrugged her shoulders and giggled. The surrounding diners couldn't help but look over when they heard the commotion. Of course, some people looked at Eric, who was behind Julia. If Julia still didn't feel anything strange, she would be a little retarded. Eric clearly saw that the girl's back involuntarily straightened a little. She seemed to want to turn her head, but her neck seemed to be rusty and stuck there. Hearing you say that really makes me sad, Eric shrugged and joked. He walked forward and sat down in the empty seat between the two girls. When Julia heard Eric's voice, her expression began to change rapidly. When Eric sat down next to her, the girl's fantasy was completely shattered. Her big eyes stayed on Eric's face for a few seconds. Suddenly, she shrank her neck and bent her waist, as if she wanted to curl into the chair to hide herself. She explained hesitantly, Eric, I didn't mean that. When Eric saw the girl's awkward look, he smiled and was about to joke with Julia a few more times. The girl squeaked a few times and suddenly stood up. I'll leave first. After saying that, the girl fled the restaurant in a panic. Eric watched Julia's back disappear speechlessly. He thought to himself, am I really that scary? He patted Elizabeth, who was still lying on the table, and said, Hey Liz, stop laughing. Be careful of the muscles on your face cramping. Only then did Elizabeth raise her head. Her face was red, and her shallow dimples were still hanging on her cheeks. She glanced across and asked, Hey, where's Julia? Eric pursed his lips and said, Isn't it because of your prank that Julia left in a fit of anger? Elizabeth glared at Eric and said, How can you blame me? You were the one who told me not to make a sound. I was just curious. I wanted to hear what Julia was saying. You were the one who led her to the pit, right? Elizabeth turned her head and looked at the door. She couldn't find Julia's voice, so she could only say, Okay, I'll apologize to her later. But in the end, it's still your fault. I took her around half the world. It wasn't easy for Julia to forget about you, but you just had to appear at this time. There was really no way to reason with an unreasonable woman. Eric thought helplessly. He could only change the topic and said, Aren't you still in school? It's already September. School should start soon, right? I've already finished all the courses I need to study. The last year is to do my graduation thesis and social practice, Elizabeth said briefly. Elizabeth gave a simple introduction and said, I've said before that my graduation thesis is about the analysis of several of your movies. How about it, great director? Can you provide me with some internal information? Eric didn't agree. Instead, he asked, You should have gotten a lot of information from Julia these days, right? Elizabeth had a helpless expression. I'm really curious about what happened between the two of you. Julia is so infatuated with you that she's hopelessly infatuated. Although she wants to bite you to death, she only says nice things. It doesn't feel real at all. Maybe I've always been like this, Eric said with a smile. That's impossible. Elizabeth shook her head firmly. Eric was puzzled. Hey, Liz, are you studying me or my movies? Both. Elizabeth didn't hide anything. I'm very interested in everything about you. I remember warning you. Before Eric could finish his sentence, Elizabeth was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She stared at Eric with her beautiful eyes and interrupted him. Busy. Okay. Eric spread his hands helplessly. I've said my goodbyes. If there's nothing else, I'm leaving. Remember to bring Julia back to Los Angeles as soon as possible. Kapoor was so angry with Julia that his hair turned white. Elizabeth rolled her eyes at Eric. Nonsense. Don't think I don't know that Julia's manager is bald and has white hair. I'm just making an analogy. Eric stood up nonchalantly. Just remember it. When the woman saw that Eric was about to leave, she immediately grabbed his collar. Hey, why are you in such a hurry? Since we've met, let's sit down and chat. Tell me about your movie. Eric looked at the woman grabbing his collar tightly without caring about her image. He had no choice but to sit down again and say, Liz, I'll teach you. Actually, what you need to do is reverse analysis of the known results. The method is very simple. You just have to praise it as much as you can. Just like the newspapers and media, list a lot of good points about the movie and exaggerate. I guarantee that you'll get an A in your thesis. After saying this, Eric remembered the antique appraisal programs he watched in his previous life. The experts didn't need to say the final results. They could tell whether an antique was real or fake just by listening to their words. It was very simple. If it was real, the experts would praise it as much as they could from the beginning. They would say that it was exquisite, the workmanship was exquisite, and so on. If it was fake, they would start to belittle it and pick on the flaws. Generally speaking, most of the time, they were just fooling laymen to watch the show. When Elizabeth heard Eric's perfunctory words, she rolled her eyes unhappily. Hey, am I such a superficial person? Eric raised his eyebrows and made a look that said, "Isn't that so?" The woman was so angry that she wanted to slam the table. I'm warning you. If you don't help, I'll kidnap Julia to a ranch in Australia. You won't be able to find her even if you want to shoot a movie. Hearing the woman's childish words, Eric couldn't help but laugh. Do whatever you want. As long as Julia is willing. Eric didn't want to argue with Elizabeth anymore. He stood up and walked out of the restaurant. The woman quickly waved her hand and called the waiter to pay the bill. She then chased after him. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.